The mining colony on Raxus Secundus existed because the Empire needed Tabana gas and didn't care how many miners died extracting it. 3,000 souls lived in prefabricated structures clinging to canyon walls, working 16-hour shifts in toxic atmospheres for credits that barely covered survival. The Empire called it productivity. Everyone else called it slavery with extra steps. Blade had come here tracking an Imperial officer named Commander Tarsus, a logistics coordinator who'd been diverting medical supplies meant for occupied worlds into black market sales, letting entire populations die from treatable diseases while he accumulated wealth. Crimson Dawn wanted him eliminated. Blade wanted him dead for more fundamental reasons. The commander was staying in the colony's administrative sector, protected by a full platoon of stormtroopers and enough security measures to make infiltration challenging, not impossible. Blade had penetrated harder targets, but challenging enough that he'd spent 2 days mapping patrol routes and identifying vulnerabilities. He should have recognized the pattern, should have noticed how perfectly the defenses were arranged, how conveniently the gaps appeared in coverage, how suspiciously accessible the target seemed despite being a high-value Imperial asset. Should have realized he was walking into a trap. Blade approached the administrative complex during shift change, that chaotic 30-minute window when exhausted miners flooded the streets and security attention divided between crowd control and position transitions. His enhanced senses tracked every heartbeat within 50 meters, cataloging threats and civilians with the automatic precision of decades hunting in urban environments. The complex's ventilation system offered access, just like on Scarif. Blade scaled the exterior wall with enhanced strength and agility that made vertical surfaces merely inconvenient, reached the intake grate, and found it already damaged. Metal scored by what looked like lightsaber cuts, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Warning bells screamed in his tactical assessment. Blade dropped back to ground level, his hand on his sword, every instinct telling him to abort and extract immediately. But Commander Tarsus was inside. The man's medical supply theft had killed thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Children had died gasping from bacterial infections that penicillin would have cured. Mothers had buried sons killed by diseases that were extinct on civilized worlds. The mission wasn't just Crimson Dawn business anymore. It was personal. Blade made his decision and immediately regretted it. He entered through the damaged ventilation grate, his enhanced senses screaming warnings that rational thought overrode. The duct was too clean. No dust, no debris, no signs of the industrial contamination that should have accumulated in a mining colony's air system. It had been cleaned recently, prepared. For him. Blade dropped into the corridor anyway, landing in a crouch with his sword already drawn, and found himself facing a semicircle of 8 figures in dark armor, each carrying ignited lightsabers that painted the hallway in shades of red death. Inquisitors. Not one, not two, but an entire hunting pack assembled specifically to corner him. The anomaly arrives precisely on schedule, the lead Inquisitor said. A female Mirialan with geometric tattoos across her green skin and a voice that carried dark side corruption like perfume. Lord Vader sends his regards. Blade's enhanced vision tracked exits in microseconds. Ventilation shaft behind him already sealed by blast door, corridor ahead blocked by Inquisitors, side passages covered by stormtroopers emerging from concealed positions. 43 hostiles minimum. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire. Perfect kill box. Vader couldn't come himself? Blade asked, buying seconds to calculate impossible odds. Had to send his students? Lord Vader is occupied with more important matters, the Mirialan Inquisitor replied. her lightsabers spinning in the distinctive helicopter pattern the Inquisitorius favored. "We are sufficient to handle one force-blind primitive with delusions of competence." The other Inquisitors laughed, cruel sounds that carried the confidence of beings who'd murdered their way across the galaxy and never faced real consequences. They'd killed Jedi, hunted Force sensitives, and turned the galaxy's mystical warriors into an endangered species. One human with a sword shouldn't even register as a threat. They were about to learn otherwise. Blade moved first, throwing himself backward toward the sealed blast door as the Inquisitors attacked in coordinated assault. 8 lightsabers converged on the space he'd occupied, their plasma blades scorching metal and filling the corridor with superheated air. Blade's enhanced agility carried him up the wall, his boots finding purchase on decorative molding that was never meant to support human weight. He kicked off hard, launching himself over the Inquisitor formation, his sword sweeping in an arc that caught one Inquisitor across the eyes. Not a killing blow. The Twi'lek stumbled back screaming, his lightsaber extinguishing as hands flew to his ruined face. But enough to break formation. Blade landed in the corridor beyond, immediately rolling as Force lightning scorched the air where he'd been standing. 3 Inquisitors had anticipated his trajectory, their dark side powers manifesting as blue-white energy that would have fried his nervous system if it had connected. He came up firing, his stolen blaster pistol speaking 6 times in controlled bursts. 2 shots got deflected by spinning lightsabers. One hit a stormtrooper who'd been too slow to take cover. The remaining 3 forced the Inquisitors to adjust position, buying Blade precious seconds. Not enough seconds. The Mirialan Inquisitor used the Force to hurl a blast door, 3 tons of reinforced durasteel that had been ripped from its moorings like paper. Blade dodged, but the door's impact with the corridor wall created a shockwave that knocked him off balance. A Zabrak Inquisitor seized the opening, his lightsaber coming in fast for a killing strike. Blade's sword intercepted it, silver meeting red plasma, and this time the impact drove him to one knee. The Zabrak pressed the advantage, his Force-enhanced strength overwhelming even Blade's hybrid physiology. Behind him, the other Inquisitors were converging, their lightsabers weaving patterns that left no escape routes. "You're fast," the Zabrak acknowledged, bearing down with lightsaber that slowly pushed closer to Blade's throat. "Strong, well-trained, but without the Force, you're just an animal waiting to be put down." Blade's response was to drive his vibroblade into the Zabrak's knee, the backup weapon he'd kept concealed, its ultrasonic edge shearing through armor and bone before the Inquisitor could react. The Zabrak's concentration shattered, his Force grip releasing, and Blade exploded upward with a rising slash that took the Inquisitor's sword arm at the elbow. The Zabrak's scream was cut short when Blade's follow-up strike took his head. 1 down, 7 to go. The corridor erupted into chaos. Lightsabers converged from multiple angles, each strike backed by years of training and dark side power. Blade moved through the assault like water, his enhanced speed and reflexes the only things keeping him ahead of plasma blades that could cut through nearly anything. His sword sang, intercepting, deflecting, occasionally parrying strikes that should have been impossible to counter. But he was taking damage. A lightsaber grazed his shoulder, burning through coat and flesh in a line of agony that his healing factor immediately began processing. Another caught his thigh, searing muscle tissue that would have crippled a normal human. Blade kept fighting, his hybrid nature letting him push through injuries that should have been incapacitating. The Inquisitors recognized the problem. They weren't fighting a Force-sensitive who relied on mystical powers. They were fighting something that operated on pure physical capability augmented by supernatural healing. Every injury they inflicted was temporary. Every advantage they gained was momentary. "Contain him!" the Mirialan shouted, her tactical assessment finally overriding arrogance. Drive him into the intersection. Activate the secondary. Blade threw his sword. The blade spun through the air, its silver edge catching corridor lighting as it flew with accuracy born from decades of practice. The Mirialan tried to deflect with her lightsaber, but the sword's trajectory was deceptive. It passed beneath her guard and buried itself in her chest, punching through armor and sternum to find her heart. She dropped, shock frozen on her green face, the dark side unable to sustain life once the physical form failed so catastrophically. 2 down. 6 remaining. But Blade had lost his primary weapon, and the Inquisitors were adapting. They stopped trying to fight him directly, instead using the Force to reshape the battlefield. Blast doors slammed shut, cutting off escape routes. Debris lifted and hurled from multiple angles simultaneously, forcing Blade into defensive positions. And underneath it all, he felt the pressure of combined dark side power, pressing against his awareness like invisible hands trying to crush his skull. "You can't win," one of the Inquisitors said, a human male whose face bore scars from some previous battle. "Even if you kill all of us, Lord Vader has assembled 3 more hunter packs. He'll keep sending Inquisitors until you fall. And eventually, you will fall." Blade retrieved his sword from the Mirialan's corpse, the blade's edge still gleaming despite being buried in tissue and bone. "Then I'll kill all of you and deal with Vader when he shows up personally." "Lord Vader doesn't need to show up," a new voice spoke from behind the Inquisitor formation. Deep, mechanical, and carrying weight that made reality feel heavier. "I'm already here." The Inquisitors parted like water, creating a corridor through their formation, and Darth Vader walked forward with footsteps that echoed like countdown to execution. 7 feet of black armor and concentrated malevolence, breathing with mechanical rhythm that seemed to synchronize with Blade's own heartbeat. The Sith Lord stopped 10 meters away, his helmet's optical sensors fixing on Blade with inhuman focus. When he spoke, his voice resonated with power that transcended mere vocal projection. "You are the anomaly, the one who should not exist, the void in the Force that bleeds the Empire, one corpse at a time." Vader's hand moved to his belt, fingers closing around his lightsaber hilt. "You will surrender, or you will die. Choose quickly." Blade's grip tightened on his sword, his enhanced senses cataloging threat indicators that exceeded anything he'd faced in either galaxy. Vader wasn't just another Inquisitor, wasn't just another Force user. The sheer presence radiating from him suggested power that had been refined through decades of violence into something approaching natural disaster. Fighting him here, trapped in a corridor with 6 Inquisitors backing him up, was suicide. "I choose option 3, Blade said, and threw a concussion grenade, stolen from a dead stormtrooper during the fight, directly at Vader's chest. The explosion rocked the corridor, superheated gases expanding with force that should have turned flesh and armor to paste. Blade was already moving, using the chaos to dive through a side passage the Inquisitors had left temporarily unguarded while focusing on their master's dramatic entrance. Behind him, through the smoke and debris, Vader's mechanical breathing continued without interruption. The grenade hadn't even slowed him down. Blade ran, not in panic, but in tactical retreat. The mining colony was a maze of industrial corridors and vertical shafts designed for efficiency rather than defense. He used that chaos, his enhanced senses navigating through passages that confused pursuing stormtroopers. But he could still feel Vader. That presence. That pressure in reality that suggested the Sith Lord wasn't just following, but tracking him through means that transcended normal perception. The Force, whatever it was, gave Vader advantages that made traditional evasion tactics inadequate. Blade needed a new plan, needed distance, needed time to regroup and assess before Vader's overwhelming power crushed him like an insect. He burst onto an exterior platform where miners were loading ore containers onto freight haulers, scattering them with his sudden appearance. Enhanced hearing caught TIE fighter engines screaming overhead. Air support, because apparently Vader wanted absolute certainty on this kill. A freight hauler was preparing for departure, its engines already cycling up. Blade sprinted toward it, enhanced speed carrying him across 50 meters before security could react, and leaped for the cargo platform as it lifted off. He caught the edge, pulled himself up, and looked back at the administrative complex. Vader stood on the platform Blade had just evacuated, his cape billowing in the hauler's thrust wash, his helmet fixed on the departing ship with mechanical focus. The Sith Lord raised one hand, not in farewell, but in demonstration. Blade felt it immediately. The freight hauler's engines dying despite being fully powered, the ship's systems failing as if someone had reached into the machinery and crushed essential components through sheer will. They were falling, the ground rushing up with terminal velocity, and Blade had perhaps 3 seconds before impact. He jumped again, this time toward a neighboring canyon wall, his enhanced strength launching him across a gap that should have been impossible to clear. He hit the rock face hard, found purchase with fingers that dug into stone, and began climbing with speed that defied human capability. Behind him, the freight hauler crashed into the canyon floor, exploding in a fireball that painted the toxic atmosphere orange and black. Blade kept climbing, his healing factor already processing injuries from the day's violence, his mind calculating next moves in a situation that had spiraled completely beyond control. Vader had found him, had assembled an army specifically to corner him, had demonstrated power that made the Inquisitors look like children playing with toys. And the hunt had only just begun. Somewhere in the canyon below, Vader was giving orders, mobilizing forces, preparing to continue pursuit with the relentless inevitability that had crushed the Jedi Order and broken entire rebellions. But Blade had survived impossible situations before, had escaped demon dimensions, vampire lords, and supernatural threats that existed beyond normal reality's rules. This was just another impossible situation, just another monster that needed to learn fear. The Daywalker disappeared into Raxus Secundus's toxic industrial landscape, wounded but alive, hunted but not caught. The game had changed. Now it was personal. Blade made it 17 kilometers before the serum completely failed. The stolen speeder, liberated from a mining supervisor who wouldn't need it anymore, carried him through Raxus Secundus's industrial wasteland at velocities that turned the toxic landscape into a blur. Behind him, TIE fighter patrols swept the canyons in coordinated search patterns, their distinctive scream echoing off rock walls that had been scarred by centuries of mining. He'd lost them temporarily, using the planet's maze of processing facilities and waste dumps to break sensor locks. But temporary was all he could manage. Vader's task force would coordinate ground and air assets, systematically eliminate hiding places, and eventually corner him in a kill zone with no escape routes. Standard Imperial tactics. Overwhelming force applied methodically until resistance became impossible. Blade had perhaps 6 hours before that net closed completely. Then the thirst hit. Not the manageable background whisper he'd learned to control through decades of discipline and chemistry. This was the real hunger, the primal need that lived at his core, surging through his nervous system like liquid fire. His vision edged red, his enhanced senses sharpened to supernatural clarity that made every heartbeat within a kilometer sound like thunder. The smell of blood, even old blood, even trace amounts carried on toxic wind, became overwhelming. The vampire side of his nature was taking control, and without serum to suppress it, there was nothing between Blade and the monster except rapidly eroding willpower. He forced the speeder to maximum velocity, trying to outrun biology that was hardwired into his cells. The industrial facility ahead, a Tybana gas processing plant operating on skeleton crew during night cycle, looked like shelter. Looked like a place to hole up, synthesize emergency serum, buy time before the hunger made him dangerous to everyone, including himself. Blade crashed the speeder through the facility's perimeter fence, the vehicle's momentum carrying it another 50 meters before structural failure turned it into scrap. He rolled from the wreckage with injuries that were already healing, his hybrid physiology processing trauma that should have required hospitalization. But healing required energy. Energy his body was demanding he acquire through methods that made synthesis look pathetically inadequate. Feed. The hunger whispered with seductive logic. These miners work for the Empire. They're complicit in occupation. Their blood would sustain you, would give you strength to fight Vader, would be justice, not murder. Blade's hands were shaking. His breath came in gasps despite his enhanced cardiovascular system operating at peak efficiency. 40 years of discipline, 40 years of maintaining the line between hunter and monster. And it was all crumbling because this galaxy didn't have the compounds his body needed. He stumbled into the processing plant's lower levels, following his senses toward the medical facility every industrial operation maintained for workplace injuries. If he could just synthesize something, anything, to dull the edge of hunger, he could maintain control long enough to extract and regroup. The medical facility was automated, staffed by a single 2-1B surgical droid that regarded Blade's entrance with mechanical curiosity. Statement: You appear to be experiencing medical distress. Inquiry: Do you require emergency treatment? Pharmaceutical synthesis equipment. Blade managed, his voice rough. Accessed now. Clarification: This unit is programmed for trauma response, not pharmaceutical. Blade grabbed the droid by its cranial unit and physically dragged it toward the medication dispensary. Override your programming, or I'll tear you apart for components. Choose. The droid's optical sensors flickered with what might have been fear if machines could feel such things. Compliance. Accessing pharmaceutical database. Warning: Unauthorized synthesis is a violation of Imperial medical protocols. Add it to my list. The droid connected to the dispensary. Its mechanical limbs working with precision Blade couldn't match in his current state. But even as it compiled the compounds he specified, Blade knew it wouldn't be enough. His body had adapted too quickly, built tolerance too efficiently. The synthesized serum would buy him maybe an hour. Maybe. Then the hunger would return, stronger, more insistent, until finally his willpower shattered completely. Synthesis complete. Warning: This compound combination has a 73% probability of adverse reactions in human. Blade injected it directly into his carotid artery, the crude serum burning through his system like acid mixed with ice. His healing factor immediately began processing it, accepting some components, rejecting others, trying desperately to find equilibrium between human cognition and vampire hunger. It helped. Barely. The red edge to his vision faded to pink. The thundering heartbeats became merely loud instead of overwhelming. But underneath the temporary relief, Blade felt his body's rejection of the solution. This wasn't sustainable, wasn't stable, was just delaying the inevitable moment when chemistry failed and instinct took control. Inquiry: Do you require? The explosion came from above, turning the facility's upper levels into an inferno. Blade's enhanced hearing caught the distinctive scream of TIE bomber engines, the secondary explosions as Tabana gas ignited, the structural groans of Dura-Steel failing under thermal stress. Vader had found him, had decided that if Blade wouldn't surrender, the entire facility was acceptable collateral damage. Smoke filled the lower levels as fire suppression systems failed. The surgical droid's optical sensors flickered, then died as power conduits severed. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, appropriate color for what was about to happen. Blade heard them coming, 15 heartbeats. Stormtroopers, moving in disciplined formation, clearing rooms with professional efficiency. They'd been ordered to secure the facility, confirm the kill, bring proof back to Vader that the anomaly had finally been eliminated. He should run, should find another exit, another escape route, another temporary sanctuary to buy another few hours of survival. But the hunger was too strong now. The crude serum was already failing, and somewhere in the part of his mind that remained coldly tactical, Blade recognized a fundamental truth. He was going to feed tonight, regardless. He crossed over his arm. The only question was whether he chose his prey or let the monster choose for him. Better to choose. Better to maintain that last shred of control. Better to feed on beings who'd made themselves complicit in the Empire's atrocities than lose control completely and slaughter everyone within reach. The rationalization was thin. Blade knew that. But it was all he had. He moved through smoke with predatory grace, his enhanced senses tracking the stormtrooper formation with perfect clarity. They were professionals. Proper spacing, overlapping fields of fire, communication discipline that spoke to veteran unit cohesion. In a fair fight, they'd be dangerous opposition. This wasn't going to be a fair fight. Blade hit the first pair from above, dropping from ventilation shafts with speed that turned his body into a weapon. His sword took one trooper's head before the man could trigger his blaster. His vibroblade found the gap between the second trooper's helmet and chest plate, severing the spine with surgical precision. Blood hit the air, fresh, warm, carrying that copper penny smell that made the hunger roar with approval. Feed. Take what you need. Survive. The remaining 13 troopers opened fire, their blaster bolts painting the smoke-filled corridor with red light. Blade moved through the barrage like a ghost, his enhanced reflexes processing trajectories faster than their targeting computers could compensate. A bolt grazed his shoulder, another injury to join the collection, another drain on reserves his body desperately needed to replenish. He closed with the formation, his sword singing through armor and flesh with efficiency that transcended mere combat technique. This was hunting. This was predation. This was the vampire side of his nature, doing what evolution had designed it for, killing with mechanical perfection. A trooper's helmet cracked under Blade's fist, the skull beneath it fracturing from impact that exceeded human strength limits. Another tried to club him with a rifle stock. Blade caught the weapon mid-swing, broke the man's arm in 3 places, and drove his vibroblade through the chest plate with force that lifted the trooper off his feet. Blood everywhere now, soaking the floor, painting the walls, filling the air with scent that made rational thought increasingly difficult. The last 5 troopers broke formation, discipline finally cracking under the reality that they weren't fighting a man. They were being hunted by something that wore human shape but operated on predatory instincts refined across millennia of evolutionary pressure. Blade caught the slowest runner, his hand closing around the trooper's helmet and squeezing until the Dura-Steel crumpled and the skull inside shattered. He dropped the body and kept pursuing, his movements flowing from one kill to the next with terrible grace. The hunger was singing now, demanding satisfaction, promising strength if he just... No. Blade stopped moving, his sword dripping blood, his body surrounded by corpses, his mind fighting desperately for control against instincts that screamed to feed. The 4 surviving stormtroopers were disappearing into smoke, their panicked retreat carrying them toward the facility's exit. He let them go, stood among the dead, breathing heavily despite enhanced cardiovascular capacity, his hands shaking from effort of maintaining control when every cell in his body demanded he chase down the survivors and drain them dry. You don't feed on humans. You don't cross that line. That's what separates you from them. Whistler's voice, remembered from decades past, from training sessions in warehouses that smelled like gun oil and vampire ash. The old man had drilled that principle into Blade's core. You hunt monsters, you don't become one. The moment you start feeding on humans, even evil humans, even humans who deserve death, you've crossed a line you can never uncross. Blade had maintained that principle for 40 years. Tonight, he'd come closer to breaking it than ever before. He searched the bodies with hands that left bloody prints on Imperial armor, looking for anything useful. Credits, weapons, medical supplies. One trooper carried a personal comlink that was still functional, its encrypted frequency probably connected to the task force's command network. Blade activated it, his voice rough but controlled. This is the anomaly. Tell Vader I'm done running. He wants me, he can come find me himself. Coordinates uploading now. He transmitted his location, then crushed the comlink. The hunger was still there, would be there until he found stable serum or died trying. But underneath it, buried beneath vampire instinct and tactical assessment, Blade recognized a strategic truth. He couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep letting Vader dictate the terms of engagement while his body deteriorated and his control eroded. Better to face the Sith Lord on ground of his choosing. Better to fight with whatever strength remained than wait until the hunger consumed him completely. Better to die human than live as a monster. The processing facility burned around him, toxic smoke mixing with Tibanna gas fumes to create atmosphere that would kill baseline humans in minutes. Blade's enhanced physiology filtered it automatically, his hybrid nature treating lethal environment as merely unpleasant. He found a vantage point overlooking the facility's main entrance and settled in to wait. His sword was clean, his weapons were checked. His serum was failing but still functional for perhaps another hour. 1 hour to face Darth Vader. 1 hour to prove that power and the Force didn't guarantee victory against someone who'd spent a lifetime killing things more powerful than himself. 1 hour to either die with dignity or become the monster he'd spent 40 years fighting. In the toxic sky above, TI fighters circled like carrion birds. On the ground below, Imperial transports were landing, disgorging stormtrooper formations that established perimeter around the burning facility. And walking through their midst with mechanical breathing that carried across the industrial wasteland came Vader himself. The Dark Lord looked up at Blade's position as if he could see through smoke and distance and concealment to locate prey with absolute certainty. When he spoke, his voice carried despite the flames and chaos. No more running, no more hiding. You wanted my attention. Anomaly. Now you have it. Vader ignited his lightsaber, red blade emerging with that distinctive snap hiss that had heralded the death of the Jedi Order. The weapon's glow reflected off his black armor, turning him into a figure of nightmare made manifest. Come down and die with whatever passes for dignity in your corrupted existence. Or I will bring this entire facility down on your head and dig your corpse from the rubble. Blade stood, his silhouette visible against the flames, his coat billowing in superheated updrafts. I've got a better idea. You come up here and try to kill me yourself. No Inquisitors, no stormtroopers, just you and me." Vader's helmet tilted slightly, the only indication of surprise the Sith Lord would allow. "You challenge me directly. You who cannot touch the Force, who bleeds like any primitive creature, who dies from wounds that inconvenience true warriors." "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing." The silence stretched, broken only by flames and mechanical breathing. Then Vader began walking forward, his stormtroopers parting to let him pass, his presence growing heavier with each step, as if reality itself was bending around his approach. "So be it. Your courage is admirable. Your stupidity is absolute. But I will grant you the death you request." The Sith Lord began ascending, using the Force to leap between levels with ease that made gravity look optional. Blade tracked his approach, calculating angles and strategies for a fight he knew he probably couldn't win, but probably wasn't definitely. And in the space between those two words lived every impossible victory Blade had ever achieved. The Daywalker raised his sword, felt the hunger singing in his veins, and prepared to face the galaxy's ultimate predator. One of them would leave this facility. The other would burn. Vader reached Blade's level with Force-enhanced jumps that treated 3-story gaps like minor inconveniences. The Sith Lord landed on the observation platform with impact that cracked Duracrete, his lightsaber casting red light across smoke and shadows. Up close, his presence was suffocating, not metaphorically, but physically, as if the air itself had become heavier in his proximity. "You look weak," Vader observed, his mechanical voice carrying undertones of satisfaction. "Injured, desperate." The report suggested formidable capability. Yet I find only a creature at the end of its endurance. Blade's grip tightened on his sword. Vader wasn't wrong. His body was running on reserves that were nearly depleted, his healing factor struggling to keep pace with accumulated damage, his serum failing in real time. But weakness and desperation were conditions Blade had learned to weaponize decades ago. "Talk's cheap," Blade said. "Let's see if your reputation matches reality." Vader attacked without further preamble. The lightsaber came in fast, not with the wild aggression of the Inquisitors, but with controlled precision that suggested absolute confidence in technique. The strike was economical, efficient, designed to test Blade's defenses while revealing nothing about Vader's full capabilities. Blade's sword intercepted it, silver meeting red plasma in a shower of sparks that lit the platform like lightning. The impact drove him back 3 steps, Vader's strength augmented by the Force exceeding even Blade's hybrid physiology. But he held the bind, his enhanced muscles straining against pressure that would have crushed normal human bones. "Impressive," Vader acknowledged, disengaging and circling with predatory patience. That blade should have melted. What alloy could possibly... Blade attacked, cutting off the question with a combination from Filipino Kali that transitioned mid-flow into Japanese Iaijutsu. The strikes came from angles designed to bypass standard lightsaber defense, using misdirection and body mechanics to create openings where none should exist. Vader blocked every strike. Not through precognition. Blade had learned to recognize that delay when fighting the fifth brother, that split second where Force users reacted to visions of the future rather than present reality. This was pure technique. Decades of lightsaber mastery reading Blade's body mechanics and countering before strikes fully developed. The Sith Lord wasn't just powerful, he was skilled. A lifetime of combat experience compressed into muscle memory and tactical instinct that operated faster than conscious thought. Dangerous. More dangerous than anything Blade had faced in either galaxy. They separated, both reassessing. The platform groaned beneath them, fire damage weakening structural supports that were never meant to sustain this level of combat stress. Smoke rolled across the space, reducing visibility for normal humans to meters. Blade's enhanced senses compensated automatically, tracking Vader through heat signatures and the sound of mechanical breathing and the displacement of air around the Sith Lord's mass. But Vader had his own supernatural perception, the Force giving him awareness that transcended normal sensory limitations. "You fight well for a being without the Force," Vader said. His lightsaber held in a two-handed grip that suggested he was preparing a serious assault. "But skill alone cannot overcome the dark side. You have no defense against my power, no counter to abilities you cannot comprehend. Then stop talking and demonstrate." Vader raised his free hand, and Blade felt invisible pressure close around his throat. Telekinesis. Force choking. The same technique the Sith Lord had used on Captain Prohl, now applied with lethal intent. Blade's enhanced physiology let him resist longer than normal humans. His hybrid cardiovascular system included redundant oxygen storage. His healing factor immediately began compensating for tissue damage, but physics was physics. Cut off air supply long enough, and even supernatural regeneration couldn't prevent brain death. Blade did the only thing possible. He closed the distance, charged directly at Vader while being strangled, his enhanced strength driving his legs forward despite oxygen deprivation that would have dropped a normal human unconscious. The Sith Lord adjusted his grip, trying to increase pressure, but Blade was already inside lightsaber range. His sword struck Vader's chest plate with force that would have sheared through durasteel armor. The blade skittered off, barely scoring the surface, and the impact feedback nearly tore the weapon from Blade's grip. Vader's armor wasn't standard issue. It was something else. Some kind of enhancement that made it nearly indestructible even against weapons that could parry lightsabers. But the strike disrupted Vader's concentration. The Force choke released as the Sith Lord was forced to defend, his lightsaber coming up to intercept Blade's follow-up attack. They traded blows at point-blank range, too close for technique to matter, just raw speed and reflexes determining who lived and who died. Blade's vibroblade found a gap in the armor, the joint between shoulder and chest plate where flexibility required lighter protection. The ultrasonic edge punched through, drawing blood that was still red despite decades of dark side corruption. Vader's response was to grab Blade's wrist with his free hand and squeeze. Cybernetic strength exceeded even hybrid enhancement, bones grinding together under pressure that threatened to pulverize. Blade felt metacarpals crack, felt his healing factor struggling to repair damage being inflicted faster than regeneration could process. He headbutted Vader's helmet with enhanced strength, the impact creating a sound like bells tolling. The Sith Lord's grip loosened slightly, not from pain, but from the sheer audacity of the attack. Nobody headbutted Darth Vader. The psychological shock was almost as effective as the physical impact. Blade tore free, leaving skin behind on Vader's cybernetic hand, and rolled backward as the lightsaber came down in an overhead strike that carved through the platform where he'd been standing. The Duracrete split, structural damage from fire and combat finally reaching critical mass. The platform collapsed. Both combatants fell through smoke and flames, dropping 3 stories through the facility's interior. Vader used the Force to arrest his fall, landing with controlled grace on the next level down. Blade had no such luxury. He hit the ground in a combat roll that distributed impact across his entire body, his enhanced durability the only thing preventing the fall from breaking every bone. He came up with his sword still in hand, blood running from multiple lacerations, his healing factor working overtime to keep him functional. The hunger was roaring now, demanding he feed to replenish the energy being burned through at catastrophic rates. Not yet. Not while he's watching. Not while there's still a chance. Vader descended to Blade's level with mechanical patience, his breathing rhythmic and unhurried. You're dying. Your body is failing. Whatever enhancements or mutations give you supernatural capability, they require sustenance you cannot acquire here. The Sith Lord tilted his helmet, studying Blade with clinical interest. I can feel your hunger. It resonates in the Force like a void trying to fill itself. You're starving, and you don't even know for what. I know exactly what I'm starving for, Blade said through gritted teeth. And you're not going to like it when I stop being polite. Then by all means, stop. The permission was deliberate provocation, but Blade was beyond caring about Vader's psychological warfare. The hunger was too strong, the serum too depleted, his control eroding with every passing second. He'd tried to maintain the line, had tried to die with dignity. Fuck dignity. Blade let the leash slip. His vision went red, not the metaphorical red of anger, but the actual perception shift that came when his vampire nature took primary control. Heartbeats became thunder. Blood scent became overwhelming. And the rational tactical assessment that had kept him alive for 40 years took back seat to predatory instinct, refined across evolutionary timescales. He moved faster than before, enhanced speed no longer constrained by human hesitation or moral calculation. His strikes came from angles that disregarded safety, committing fully to offense because the prey was dangerous and needed to die now before it could threaten the pack. Vader's lightsaber work adapted, shifting from controlled precision to defensive necessity. The Sith Lord was still faster with the Force augmenting his cybernetic body, but Blade's assault had transformed from tactical combat to berserker rage channeled through professional skill. It was terrifying. A Jedi would have recognized the shift and adjusted tactics accordingly. But Vader wasn't a Jedi anymore. He was something else. Something that had forgotten what it meant to face an opponent operating on pure, predatory instinct. Blade's sword found gaps in Vader's defense that hadn't existed before. The strikes weren't fancy, weren't clever. They were just committed, launched with the absolute certainty that either the prey died or the predator died and nothing else mattered. He scored a cut across Vader's shoulder joint, then another across the Sith Lord's thigh where armor plating met leg servos. Neither wound was serious, but blood was flowing, and blood was what the hunger demanded. Vader caught him with a Force push that sent Blade crashing through a wall into an adjacent chamber. The impact should have shattered his spine. Would have shattered his spine if his healing factor wasn't burning through reserves at unsustainable rates to keep him mobile. Blade stood immediately, ignoring injuries that would have hospitalized normal humans for months, and charged back through the hole he'd created. His sword led, his entire body committed to the strike in a way that transcended technique into something more fundamental. Kill or be killed. Hunt or starve. Survive or die. The vampire's creed, distilled to its purest form. Vader met the charge with his lightsaber raised, and for the first time, Blade heard something in the Sith Lord's breathing that might have been uncertainty. The mechanical rhythm hitched just for a moment. As Vader recognized, he was fighting something that couldn't be intimidated or reasoned with, or broken through psychological warfare. He was fighting a predator that had stopped pretending to be human. Their blades met again, but this time Blade didn't disengage. He pressed the bind, his enhanced strength matching Vader's cybernetic power, his sword edge grinding against lightsaber plasma in a contest of wills and physics that shouldn't have been possible. What are you? Vader demanded, the question carrying genuine curiosity beneath mechanical distortion. Blade's answer came through bared teeth, his voice carrying undertones that hadn't been there before. Something ancient, something hungry, something that spoke from the part of him that wasn't human and never had been. I'm what hunts the hunters. Then he did something Vader didn't expect, couldn't predict, and had no defense against. He bit through the armor. His teeth, sharper now, transformed by the hunger into something approaching fangs, found the wound in Vader's shoulder and tore. Not feeding, not yet, but marking, claiming, demonstrating dominance in the most primal way possible. Vader's shocked response was pure dark side power. Force lightning erupting from his hand in blue-white fury that would have killed anything mortal. Blade took the full blast at point-blank range, his body convulsing as electricity fried nerves and boiled blood, and did everything physics dictated it should do. His healing factor processed it. Slowly, painfully, but it processed it. When the lightning stopped, Blade was still standing, smoking, burned, but standing, and smiling with teeth still stained with Vader's blood. My turn, Blade said, and attacked again. The fight had transcended technique into something more fundamental. Two apex predators locked in combat where only survival mattered. Vader's lightsaber wove defensive patterns born from decades of killing Jedi. But those patterns were designed for opponents who fought with reason and restraint. Blade was operating on pure predatory instinct now, his hybrid nature fully unleashed, and instinct didn't care about defense or sustainability or anything except ending the threat. Vader's next force push was stronger. Strong enough to launch Blade through two more walls, his body crashing through duracrete and metal support beams before slamming into industrial machinery that hadn't been designed to stop human projectiles. The impact would have liquefied organs. Should have killed him outright. Blade's healing factor was burning through energy reserves that didn't exist anymore. Pulling from sources his body shouldn't have been able to access, keeping him functional through sheer supernatural stubbornness. He rose again, slower this time, his movements carrying the jerky quality of someone whose nervous system was fighting to maintain coordination. Blood ran from wounds that were healing visibly, but not fast enough. His enhanced physiology was approaching its limits. Even vampire regeneration had breaking points, and Blade was discovering his in real time. Remarkable, Vader said, his mechanical breathing somehow conveying genuine fascination despite the artificiality. The Sith Lord walked through the holes Blade's body had created, his cape dragging through debris, his posture relaxed because he recognized what Blade was only beginning to accept. This fight was over. Your regeneration exceeds anything I've encountered. Your resilience defies biological limitations. But you're operating on borrowed time measured in seconds. Blade spat blood, his own blood, not Vader's, though the taste of the Sith Lord's essence still lingered. Seconds is all I need. For what? One final attack? A dramatic last stand? Vader raised his lightsaber almost casually. You cannot win. Even if you somehow killed me, an outcome your deteriorating condition makes impossible. My death would only bring the full weight of the Empire down on you. Lord Sidious would take personal interest. You would face power that makes my capabilities look insignificant. Then I'll kill him too. The simple certainty in Blade's voice made Vader pause. Not from fear. The Sith Lord had long ago conquered that weakness, but from recognition. He'd heard that tone before, in his own voice, when he'd been younger and less broken. The absolute conviction that willpower could overcome impossible odds. That determination alone could bridge the gap between capability and necessity. It was the voice of someone who didn't know how to surrender. "You remind me of someone," Vader said, his lightsaber lowering slightly. "A Jedi I once knew. He had your stubbornness, your refusal to accept reality, your belief that nobility and determination could overcome superior power." "What happened to him?" "I killed him. Burned him alive on Mustafar while he screamed for mercy." Vader's mechanical breathing filled the silence. His name was Anakin Skywalker. He was weak, sentimental. He believed in things like justice and redemption. I am what remains when such delusions burn away. Blade's enhanced senses caught something beneath the mechanical distortion. Pain. Old pain, buried under decades of rage and dark side corruption, but still present like a wound that had never properly healed. Vader wasn't just the Empire's weapon. He was a broken man trapped inside a machine, using power to fill voids that power could never address. A monster who'd been made rather than born. Almost relatable. "Then he's still in there," Blade said, forcing himself upright despite his body's protests. "Under all that armor and rage, the person you were. The person you killed. He is dead." Vader's voice carried absolute finality. "And you will join him." The Sith Lord attacked with renewed intensity, his lightsaber flowing through forms that Blade recognized from watching recordings of Jedi combat. Xian's aggressive counters, Jem So's overwhelming power strikes, Makashi's precise blade work. Vader had mastered every style and synthesized them into something uniquely lethal. Blade had no formal lightsaber training, no decades studying ancient combat forms. What he had was 40 years of killing things that were stronger, faster, and more powerful than him through adaptation and refusal to die. It was almost enough. His sword met Vader's lightsaber in combinations that no longer followed any recognizable fighting style. Just pure instinct channeled through professional experience, creating openings through unpredictability rather than technique. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds now, his healing factor unable to keep pace with accumulated damage, his enhanced physiology approaching total systemic failure. But he kept fighting, kept pressing, kept refusing to fall. Then Vader changed tactics. Instead of attacking directly, the Sith Lord reached out with the Force and pulled. Not pulling Blade toward him, but pulling on Blade's internal systems. Blood vessels, organs, the biological machinery that kept him functional. It felt like someone had reached inside his chest and was trying to tear his heart out through his rib cage. Blade dropped to one knee, his sword clattering from nerveless fingers, his entire body seizing as Vader demonstrated why lightsaber combat was only one aspect of Sith power. The Force could kill without ever touching an opponent, could crush organs and snap spines and stop hearts with nothing more than focused intent. "This is the difference between us," Vader said, maintaining the telekinetic grip while approaching with mechanical patience. "You are a creature of biology, however enhanced. I am something more. The Force flows through me, gives me power beyond mere physical capability. You cannot overcome that with determination alone." Blade's vision was tunneling, black spots appearing at the edges as his brain began shutting down from oxygen deprivation and organ trauma. The hunger was screaming now, demanding he feed immediately or die, his vampire nature recognizing the threat and preparing desperate measures. Feed. Take his blood. Drain him. Survive. "No," Blade gasped, the word barely audible. "Not like this. Not becoming the monster." "What?" Vader's grip loosened slightly, confusion penetrating his dark side focus. Blade used that moment of confusion, used it with everything he had left. His hand shot out, not toward his sword, but toward one of the industrial machines his body had crashed through earlier. A plasma welder, its fuel tank ruptured, spilling highly volatile compounds across the floor. He shot the tank. The explosion turned the chamber into an inferno. Superheated plasma washing over both combatants with temperatures that exceeded lightsaber edges. Vader's armor protected him, barely. But the shockwave disrupted his force grip and sent him staggering backward. Blade wasn't protected. The plasma hit him directly, burned through clothes and flesh, should have killed him instantly. His healing factor processed it as just another injury, regenerating tissue even as it was destroyed, keeping him alive through the kind of damage that defied medical science's understanding of biological limits. When the flames cleared, Blade was standing. Barely. His body was a horror show of burns and exposed tissue. His enhanced healing visibly knitting skin back together in real time, but fighting a losing battle against accumulated trauma. He retrieved his sword with hands that left bloody prints on the hilt. "Still here," Blade said, his voice ruined by smoke inhalation and flame damage. "Still fighting, still not dead." Vader regarded him through his helmet's optical sensors, and for a long moment, neither moved. The Sith Lord's armor was scorched, his cape burned away, his breathing slightly more labored than before. He was injured, minor injuries compared to Blade's catastrophic damage, but injured nonetheless. "I understand now," Vader said finally. "You're not fighting to win. You're fighting to prove you can survive, to demonstrate that determination transcends power. It's admirable and utterly futile." The Sith Lord raised his hand, gathering the force for what would clearly be a final, overwhelming attack. Blade felt the pressure building, the air itself seeming to crystallize around Vader's intent. This wouldn't be a casual force push or strangling grip. This would be power sufficient to crush him into paste, to ensure even supernatural healing couldn't process the damage. Then a voice crackled through the facility's damaged comm system, metallic, distorted, but carrying undertones of rage, barely contained. "Fifth brother to Lord Vader. The criminal organization Crimson Dawn has launched simultaneous attacks on 3 Imperial installations in the Outer Rim. Grand Inquisitor requests your immediate presence. The attacks are coordinated, professional. They're trying to draw you away from the anomaly." Vader's hand remained raised, the power still gathering. "Let them attack. I will deal with Crimson Dawn after I eliminate this threat." "My lord." The fifth brother's voice carried unusual hesitation. "One of the installations is the Emperor's personal research facility on Wayland. Lord Sidious has personally requested your presence." The silence stretched. Blade could see the calculation happening behind Vader's helmet, weighing the importance of killing one anomaly against defying the Emperor's direct request. The Sith Lord's entire existence was built on service to his master, on being the Empire's weapon, on subordinating personal desires to the greater purpose. "The Emperor's will is absolute," Vader said finally, lowering his hand. The gathered power dissipated, leaving the air feeling suddenly lighter. He turned toward Blade, his helmet fixing him with unreadable focus. "You have earned a temporary reprieve. Not through victory, you were seconds from death, but through fortune and timing." Blade said nothing. He didn't have the energy for banter anymore. "When I return," Vader continued, "this ends. I will find you wherever you hide. We'll hunt you across the galaxy if necessary. And next time, there will be no interruptions, no dramatic escapes, just death." "Looking forward to it," Blade managed. Vader studied him for a moment longer. then turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the burning facility. Blade heard TIE fighter engines screaming as the Sith Lord's personal shuttle departed, felt the pressure of Vader's presence finally lifting as the Dark Lord left orbit. Then he collapsed. His body had been operating on reserves that didn't exist, pushed beyond every biological limitation through sheer supernatural stubbornness. Now that the immediate threat was gone, his systems were shutting down one after another. Healing factor couldn't regenerate tissue without energy. Enhanced metabolism couldn't process trauma without fuel. Even vampire constitution had limits. Blade was discovering all of them simultaneously. Feed. Must feed. Die or feed. Choose. The hunger was beyond control now. Beyond suppression. Beyond everything except base biological imperative. His body needed sustenance immediately, or it would start consuming itself, burning through muscle and organ tissue to fuel the healing factor that was the only thing keeping him alive. Blade! The voice came from above. Familiar voice, feminine, carrying concern poorly hidden. Sindra descended through the smoke on a grappling line, her leku twitching in patterns of extreme distress. I've got transport. We need to move before Imperial reinforcements. She stopped, seeing him properly for the first time, seeing the extent of the damage, seeing the predatory hunger in his eyes that had nothing human in it anymore. Don't. Blade forced the word out through a throat that was still regenerating from plasma burns. Leave. Not safe. Can't control. I'm not leaving you here. Sindra activated her comlink. Medical team to my position. Immediate extraction. Patient is critical. You don't understand. Blade tried to push himself away, tried to create distance between himself and the prey that was standing too close, smelling too much like blood and warmth and everything his vampire nature demanded. I'm going to hurt you. Going to kill you. Can't stop it. Sindra knelt beside him despite the warning, her hands beginning emergency field treatment that wouldn't accomplish anything against damage this extensive. Maul sent me, gave me something for emergencies. She pulled out an injector, sleek alien design, filled with dark red liquid that looked disturbingly like blood. Said you'd need this if the hunger took over. What is it? Synthesized blood substitute. Developed for a species that feeds on hemoglobin. Not perfect for your physiology, but it should. Blade grabbed the injector and pressed it against his carotid artery without waiting for instructions. The compound hit his system like liquid fire mixed with ice water, his body immediately recognizing sustenance even if the source was artificial. The hunger receded slightly, not satisfied, but manageable, giving his rational mind enough space to function. More, Blade said. Need more. Sindra produced 3 additional injectors. Blade used all of them, feeling his healing factor finally get the fuel it needed to properly process the catastrophic damage. Burns began closing faster. Organs finished regenerating. Bones that had been cracked or fractured knitted back together with speed that would have looked supernatural to anyone watching. It wasn't enough to fully restore him, but it was enough to stabilize, enough to think, enough to be human again instead of just hunger wearing a man's shape. Maul knew, Blade said, his voice still rough but functional. Knew I'd lose control eventually. Had this prepared. He understands monsters, Sindra said simply. Because he is one. Because he spent decades learning to control rage that should have consumed him. He recognized what you are because he sees it when he looks in mirrors. Blade processed that, his enhanced cognition reassembling tactical awareness from the chaos of berserker rage. Maul had been using him, but also preparing contingencies. preparing ways to keep his weapon functional when biology threatened to make him uncontrollable. Smart, manipulative, and disturbingly thoughtful in ways Blade hadn't expected from a criminal Sith Lord. "Can you walk?" Syndra asked, helping him stand. "Yeah, barely." Blade retrieved his sword, noting the blade was scorched but still functional. Everything else, his pistols, his knives, his equipment, was scattered across multiple levels of a burning facility. Loss acceptable compared to survival. They made their way to Syndra's transport, with Blade leaning heavily on support he wouldn't normally need. His body was healing, but exhaustion went beyond physical. He'd pushed himself closer to the edge than ever before. Had almost crossed lines he'd spent 40 years maintaining. Had almost become the thing he hunted. The transport lifted off as Imperial reinforcements arrived, their TIE fighters converging on the facility too late to matter. Blade watched Raxus Secundus recede through the viewport, the burning processing plant a monument to how close he'd come to both death and damnation. "Where to?" Syndra asked. "Anywhere Vader isn't." Blade closed his eyes, feeling the artificial blood compound working through his system. It wasn't satisfying like the real thing would have been, but it was enough. Enough to maintain control. Enough to stay human. For now. But he'd learned something tonight that changed everything. Fighting Vader head-on was suicide. The Sith Lord was too powerful, too skilled, too augmented by technology and the Force to overcome through conventional combat. If Blade was going to survive in this galaxy, he needed to adapt. Needed to become something more than just a hunter with a sword. Needed to learn the rules of this galaxy's power structure and find ways to break them. Maul had offered something dangerous. Dark side training. The ability to control the hunger through the same power that corrupted Force users across millennia. Blade had refused then. But after tonight, after feeling how close he'd come to losing himself completely, maybe refusing wasn't an option anymore. Maybe the only way to fight monsters was to understand what made them monstrous. Maybe the line he'd been trying to maintain was an illusion, and survival meant accepting what he'd always been. A monster who chose to hunt monsters. The question was whether that choice still meant anything. Dathomir's mists welcomed them back, like a living thing. The planet's atmosphere seeming to recognize predators when they returned bloodied and changed. Blade had spent the 3-day hyperspace journey recovering physically. His healing factor had processed the worst damage, leaving only new scars to join the collection. But mental recovery was proving more difficult. He'd crossed a threshold on Raxus Secundus. Hadn't fed on humans, but he'd wanted to. Had come within heartbeats of draining Syndra despite knowing she was an ally. The artificial blood compound Maul provided was keeping the hunger manageable, but manageable wasn't controlled. It was just delayed disaster. Maul was waiting in the same temple courtyard where they'd first met. His cybernetic legs allowing him to stand perfectly still, in a way that organic limbs couldn't sustain. His yellow eyes tracked Blade's approach with the focus of someone reading a detailed report written in body language and visible injury. "You fought Vader," Maul said. Not a question. Statement of fact derived from observation. And you survived. That alone places you among perhaps a dozen beings in the galaxy who can make such a claim. Blade's response was blunt. I didn't survive through skill. Survived through luck and the Emperor needing his attack dog somewhere else. Luck is a resource like any other. Those who dismiss it die foolishly. Maul gestured toward the temple entrance. Come, we have much to discuss, and you have a decision to make. They walked through corridors carved from black stone that seemed to drink light. The architecture suggesting civilizations that had understood the relationship between environment and power. The Nightsisters had built this place. Blade knew from data he'd reviewed. Force wielders who practiced magics that blurred the line between mystical power and ritualistic technique. Maul led him to a chamber dominated by a meditation circle inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Not physically painful, but conceptually uncomfortable, as if the markings existed partially in dimensions human perception couldn't properly process. "Sit," Maul commanded, settling into his own meditation position with mechanical precision. "You came here believing you could maintain your human principles while operating in a galaxy governed by power. Vader has demonstrated why that belief is fatal." Blade remained standing. "I maintained those principles for 40 years, killed thousands of vampires, demons, and supernatural threats without becoming one of them. One bad fight doesn't change that, doesn't it?" Maul's yellow eyes reflected the chamber's dim lighting. "Syndra reported you nearly killed her, that you were seconds from feeding despite your vaunted control. Your serum is failing. Your body requires sustenance you refuse to take. How long before the hunger overrides your precious principles completely?" "I'll find another solution. Better chemistry, more stable compounds." "There is no chemistry that can suppress nature indefinitely." Maul's voice carried the weight of experience. "I know. I spent years trying to suppress the rage that burned through my mind after Kenobi destroyed me. Tried meditation, tried alchemy, tried every technique the Nightsisters possessed. Nothing worked. The rage remained, consuming me from within, until I finally understood the fundamental truth." "What truth?" "That suppression is weakness. Control comes not from denying what you are, but from embracing it fully and directing it with discipline." Maul stood, his cybernetic legs carrying him toward Blade with predatory grace. "You are a vampire. A predator. Fighting that nature is like trying to stop a sun from burning. Possible for moments, but ultimately futile and self-destructive." Blade's jaw tightened. "I've heard that argument before. From vampires trying to justify feeding on innocence. From demons claiming their evil was just their nature. Accepting what you are doesn't mean surrendering to it." "I'm not suggesting surrender. I'm suggesting mastery." Maul activated a holographic display showing combat footage. Blade fighting the Inquisitors, fighting Vader, moving with speed and power that exceeded human limitation. "You already channel your predatory nature into useful violence. You hunt, you kill, you survive through instincts refined across evolutionary timescales. The dark side of the Force is simply another tool for focusing that nature. The dark side corrupts, turns users into monsters. The dark side reveals what you already are," Maul corrected. "Jedi claim it corrupts because they begin from a place of denying natural emotions, passion, anger, fear. When those emotions inevitably surface, the Jedi experience it as corruption. But you?" Maul's smile was sharp. "You're already a monster, Blade. Have been since birth. The dark side wouldn't corrupt you. It would give you the tools to control what you've been suppressing." Blade wanted to argue, wanted to explain that maintaining humanity despite supernatural nature was the entire point, that surrendering to power was exactly what separated hunters from the things they hunted. But he'd seen himself on Raxus Secundus, had felt the moment when rational thoughts surrendered to hunger, when decades of discipline evaporated under biological imperative. Had recognized, in that terrible clarity, that he was one bad moment from becoming everything he'd spent his life fighting. "What are you offering?" Blade asked finally. training. Limited instruction in channeling the dark side to enhance your already formidable capabilities. Maul began pacing, his movements carrying the rhythm of a practiced lecture. Not to make you a Sith. That requires decades of commitment and philosophical indoctrination I have neither time nor interest in providing, but to give you techniques that will let you survive encounters with beings like Vader. And the price? Continued service to Crimson Dawn. Your skills as a hunter directed at Imperial targets that bleed the Empire while advancing our interests. Plus, Maul's voice took on harder edge. Full commitment. No more pretending you're something other than what you are. No more moral limitations that compromise operational effectiveness. There it was. The real price. Not credits or missions, but fundamental compromise of the principles Blade had built his identity around. I don't kill innocents, Blade said. That's non-negotiable. I'm not asking you to kill innocents. I'm asking you to stop drawing arbitrary lines between acceptable and unacceptable violence based on codes that don't apply in this galaxy. Maul's eyes bored into him. You killed stormtroopers on Raxus Secundus. Young men conscripted or indoctrinated, many of whom had no choice in their service. By what logic are they more acceptable targets than Imperial officers, than collaborators who profit from occupation? They were actively trying to kill me. And Imperial officers actively implement policies that kill millions. Collaborators actively profit from suffering. Where is your moral line, Blade? Because from my perspective, it looks suspiciously like self-serving rationalization rather than genuine principle. Blade had no good answer. The stormtroopers had been following orders. Many were victims of Imperial indoctrination as much as its enforcers. He'd killed them anyway because they threatened him and justified it through immediate necessity rather than broader moral framework. Maybe Maul was right. Maybe his principles were just comforting lies he told himself to justify violence that served his survival. I need to think about this, Blade said. You have 6 hours. Then Crimson Dawn will reassess whether you remain an asset or become a liability. Maul turned toward the chamber's exit. I respect your capabilities, Blade, but I will not compromise my organization's security for someone who can't decide whether they're a warrior or a philosopher playing at violence. The former Sith Lord departed, leaving Blade alone in the meditation chamber with symbols that hurt to perceive and a choice that hurt even more to consider. Accept dark side training. Learn to channel the hunger and rage that had nearly killed him. Become more effective, more dangerous, more capable of surviving in a galaxy that rewarded power above all else. The price was accepting what he was, fully, without the comforting lies about maintaining humanity and noble purpose. Just embracing that he was a predator who killed for survival and dressed it up in moral justification. Or refuse. Maintain his principles. Try to find another way to control the hunger, another path to survival that didn't compromise everything he'd built his identity around. The price was probably death. Vader would find him eventually. The hunger would overwhelm him eventually. Without tools to manage both, his moral high ground would just be a prettier grave marker. Blade sat in the meditation circle, his enhanced senses taking in the chamber's details with supernatural clarity. The symbols weren't just decoration, they were functional, designed to focus whatever force energy the Nightsisters channeled. Ancient techniques that predated Jedi and Sith, developed by force wielders who'd approached power from different philosophical direction. He thought about Whistler. The old man would have told him to refuse, would have said that compromising principles for survival meant you'd already lost the important fight. would have reminded him that hunters who became monsters deserved the same fate as the monsters they hunted. But Whistler had never faced Darth Vader, had never fought in a galaxy where supernatural power was commonplace and being merely superhuman made you prey rather than predator, had never experienced the dark side's call or understood that some threats required power beyond conventional capability to overcome. Blade thought about the fifth brother, broken but alive, about the Inquisitors he'd killed, about Vader's overwhelming strength and the recognition that raw determination wasn't sufficient against beings who could crush organs with thought. He thought about the moment on Raxus Secundus when he'd almost fed on Syndra, when 40 years of discipline had evaporated under hunger that chemistry couldn't manage indefinitely. He thought about what he'd told himself for decades, that he was different from the vampires he hunted, that maintaining humanity despite supernatural nature made him a hunter rather than a monster, that the line between them was clear, bright, and inviolate. Then he remembered the stormtroopers he'd killed, the mercenaries, the various beings across this galaxy he'd eliminated with the same cold efficiency he'd brought to hunting vampires on Earth. And he recognized, with uncomfortable clarity, that the line had always been an illusion. He was a killer, had always been a killer. The morality he wrapped around that violence was just decoration, important decoration, decoration that kept him from becoming purely monstrous, but decoration nonetheless. Maybe Maul was right. Maybe control came not from suppressing what you were, but from embracing it with enough discipline to direct it purposefully. Maybe the only way to survive in this galaxy was to become more of what he already was. 6 hours later, Blade found Maul in a training courtyard where ancient Nightsister warriors had once practiced combat techniques that merged martial skill with mystical power. The former Sith Lord was working through lightsaber forms with mechanical precision, his cybernetic body moving faster than organic limbs could manage. "I've made my decision," Blade said. Maul extinguished his lightsaber, turning to face him with yellow eyes that promised either damnation or salvation, depending on perspective. "And teach me. Show me how to control the hunger through your dark side techniques. Make me effective enough to kill Vader if the opportunity comes." Blade's voice was steady, carrying none of the doubt that had plagued him during meditation. "But understand something. I'm not becoming your weapon, not surrendering my judgment to Crimson Dawn's agenda. I'll work with you, but the moment your organization crosses lines, I won't tolerate. We're done. Fair terms." Maul ignited his double-bladed lightsaber, the red plasma casting his tattooed face in demonic light. "Your training begins now. Defend yourself." The Sith Lord attacked with speed that made the Inquisitors look slow, his blade weaving patterns designed to kill rather than instruct. Blade barely got his sword up in time, the impact driving him backward, his enhanced reflexes the only thing preventing immediate decapitation. "Lesson 1, Maul said, pressing the assault without mercy. "The dark side is not gentle. It does not coddle students or offer gradual progression. It demands absolute commitment in every moment. Or it consumes you." Blade defended desperately, his technique insufficient against someone who'd been training since childhood. Maul's blade found flesh, a line across Blade's ribs, another across his shoulder, shallow cuts designed to teach rather than kill, but painful nonetheless. "Feel the anger," Maul continued, his attacks flowing seamlessly between offense and defense. "The rage at being hunted, the fury at your body's betrayal, the hatred of circumstances that forced this choice. Don't suppress those emotions. Channel them." Blade felt his healing factor processing the cuts. his hybrid nature keeping him mobile despite accumulating damage. But more importantly, he felt the anger Maul described. The frustration of being pushed into corners, the rage at Vader's overwhelming power, the fury at biology that made him vulnerable. He'd spent 40 years suppressing those emotions, channeling them into cold, tactical assessment rather than hot, passionate response. What if he stopped suppressing? Blade's next strike came faster, backed by anger he'd been holding in reserve. The blow actually made Maul adjust position, the former Sith Lord's eyes narrowing with approval. Yes, more of that. Let the rage fuel your body. Give your movements purpose beyond mere technique. Maul's attacks intensified, his double blade creating a web of red light that seemed to occupy all possible defensive positions simultaneously. You're already a killer, already comfortable with violence. The dark side simply strips away pretense and lets you be what you are without guilt. Blade defended, attacked, felt himself slipping into rhythms that felt simultaneously wrong and natural. The anger was there, had always been there, buried beneath professional detachment and moral rationalization. Now it was surfacing, giving his movements edge they'd been missing. He was faster now, stronger, more committed to strikes that disregarded safety in favor of aggression. It felt disturbingly good. "Excellent," Maul said, and drove Blade to his knees with a force push that came from nowhere. But anger without discipline is just noise. The true power of the dark side comes from focused hatred, from channeling rage with such precision that it becomes scalpel rather than hammer. Blade looked up at the former Sith Lord, breathing heavily, his body covered in shallow cuts that were already healing. "How long? How long until you master this? Years, if you pursue it fully. But you don't need mastery. You need functionality." Maul extended his hand, helping Blade stand. 6 weeks of intensive training. Then we'll see if you can channel the dark side effectively enough to survive your next encounter with Vader. And if I can't? Maul's smile was predatory. Then you die, and I find a new weapon. But I don't think you'll fail. You're too stubborn, too determined, too much like me. Whether that was compliment or condemnation, Blade couldn't tell. But he'd made his choice, had decided to embrace power and see where it led, had accepted that maintaining humanity in a galaxy this violent might require becoming something more or less than human. The training had begun, and with it, the slow transformation from hunter to something darker, something that would either let him survive Vader's inevitable return, or become the monster he'd always feared he was. 6 weeks passed in a blur of pain, discipline, and transformation. Maul's training methodology made vampire hunting look gentle by comparison. Every morning began before Dathomir's red sun rose, with meditation exercises designed to strip away the mental barriers Blade had spent decades constructing. The Nightsister rituals Maul taught weren't like Jedi meditation. There was no search for inner peace or cosmic harmony. Instead, they involved confronting the darkness within, acknowledging it, and learning to wield it like a weapon. The Jedi teach detachment, Maul explained during one particularly brutal session, his double-bladed lightsaber leaving fresh burns across Blade's torso. They claim emotions cloud judgment, that passion leads to suffering. They're partially correct. Uncontrolled emotion is weakness. But controlled passion? Focused rage? That's power. Blade defended with his sword, the silver blade meeting red plasma in exchanges that were becoming faster, more fluid, more natural. His body had adapted to lightsaber combat's unique rhythms, his enhanced reflexes learning to read the energy blade's behavior through repetition and pain. The hunger you feel, Maul continued, disengaging and circling. The thirst for blood, the predatory instinct that nearly made you kill Syndra. That's not weakness. That's your true nature asserting itself. Stop fighting it. Accept it. Channel it. And if I channel it wrong, if I lose control completely, then you die, and you were never worthy of survival. Maul's voice carried no sympathy. The dark side doesn't protect the weak. It amplifies what you already are. If your core is weak, if your discipline is insufficient, it will consume you. But I don't believe your core is weak. The afternoon sessions focused on practical applications. Maul taught blade techniques that straddled the line between martial skill and force manipulation, not true dark side powers, since Blade had no midi-chlorians to channel the force properly, but methods for leveraging his predatory nature in ways that mimicked force enhancement. Your enhanced senses, Maul said, demonstrating a combat flow that involved reading micro-movements and predicting attacks. You already perceive more than baseline humans. The dark side philosophy teaches you to trust those perceptions absolutely. No second-guessing, no rational override. Instinct refined through discipline. Blade practiced, letting his enhanced hearing and vision guide his responses before his conscious mind fully processed threats. It felt like fighting drunk, surrendering control to subconscious processing that operated faster than rational thought. But after enough repetition, the technique became natural, dangerous, effective. He was moving faster now, hitting harder. His healing factor seemed to function more efficiently when he stopped suppressing the anger that fueled it. Wounds that would have taken hours to heal were closing in minutes when he channeled rage into the regeneration process. It should have been concerning. Should have felt like corruption taking root. Instead, it felt like finally operating at full capacity. The evening sessions were philosophical. If philosophy meant Maul deconstructing every moral principle Blade had built his identity around, and demonstrating why those principles were inadequate for survival in a galaxy governed by power. You claim you don't kill innocents, Maul said one night, after particularly brutal sparring had left them both injured. Define innocent. People who aren't threats, who haven't chosen to be complicit in evil. So the stormtroopers you killed on Raxus Secundus were complicit? The conscripts pulled from occupied worlds, indoctrinated from childhood, given no real choice in their service? They were trying to kill me. Exactly. Your definition of innocent is self-serving. Anyone threatening you becomes acceptable target, regardless of their actual culpability. Maul's yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness. I'm not criticizing. I'm pointing out that your morality is already flexible. You've already accepted that survival sometimes requires killing beings who are more victim than villain. Blade wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. He'd killed the stormtroopers without hesitation because they threatened him, justifying it through immediate necessity rather than broader moral framework. If he was honest, his principles had always been more guideline than absolute rule. The difference between us, Maul continued, is that I acknowledge this reality while you pretend otherwise. I accept that in a galaxy this violent survival requires violence, and decorating that violence with moral justification is just theater for those too weak to accept what they are. So you're saying morality is meaningless. I'm saying morality is personal. You can have codes, I have codes. But pretending those codes are universal truths rather than individual preferences is self-delusion. Maul stood, his cybernetic legs carrying him toward the training ground's exit. Tomorrow we begin working on your most critical weakness, your vulnerability to Force users. Sleep. You'll need strength for what comes next. The next phase of training was the hardest. Maul brought in Dryden Voss and several Crimson Dawn operatives who had limited Force sensitivity, not enough to become Jedi or Sith, but sufficient to produce minor telekinetic effects and enhanced perception. They attacked Blade in coordinated assaults, using their abilities to mimic Inquisitor tactics. Force users rely on their powers, Maul explained, watching from the sidelines as 3 operatives drove Blade backward with telekinetic barrages and precognitive defense. They assume supernatural capability gives them overwhelming advantage. Your job is to demonstrate why that assumption is fatal. Blade took a telekinetic blast to the chest, the invisible force launching him across the courtyard. His healing factor processed the impact, getting him back on his feet in seconds. He charged again, this time anticipating the telekinetic attack and rolling beneath it, his enhanced agility letting him close distance before the operatives could reset. His sword found flesh, not killing blows. Maul had been specific about that, but enough to tag opponents and simulate lethal strikes. The operatives fell back, their minor Force abilities insufficient against someone who fought with professional lethality augmented by supernatural physiology. Better? Maul called. But you're still reacting. Force users with genuine power will read your intentions before you act. You need to operate on instinct they can't predict because you don't know what you're doing until you're already doing it. It took 3 weeks to internalize that lesson. 3 weeks of fighting opponents who could sense his intentions through the Force, who anticipated his strikes and countered before attacks fully developed. Blade learned to compartmentalize his conscious mind, letting surface thoughts and obvious telegraphs distract Force users, while his subconscious directed actual attacks through pathways even he didn't consciously recognize. It was maddening. Gave him splitting headaches that even his healing factor struggled to process. But gradually, he began landing hits on opponents who should have been untouchable. The Force-sensitive operatives started falling more consistently, their precognition failing against attacks Blade launched before knowing he was launching them. "You're becoming unpredictable," Voss observed after one particularly successful session. Force users sense intentions through the web of probability and destiny. But you're operating outside that web now, like your actions exist in quantum uncertainty until the moment of execution. Is that good? For killing Force users? Excellent. For maintaining stable personality structure? Voss's scarred face twisted into something approximating concern. Potentially disastrous. Operating on pure instinct without conscious oversight is how berserkers happen. How warriors become monsters who can't distinguish friend from foe. "I'll manage," Blade said, though he wasn't entirely convinced. The technique felt simultaneously empowering and dangerous, like removing safety protocols from weapon systems and trusting reflexes to prevent catastrophe. By week 5, Blade was consistently defeating multiple Force-sensitive opponents in training scenarios. His sword work had integrated lessons from lightsaber combat, not adopting formal styles, but incorporating principles about energy management and defensive economy. His enhanced physiology was operating at peak efficiency, the dark side philosophy helping him channel rather than suppress his predatory nature. He was faster, stronger, more dangerous than he'd been on Earth, and he could feel himself changing in ways that went beyond combat capability. The hunger was still there, would always be there, fundamental to his vampire nature. But it felt different now, more manageable, like acknowledging its presence had somehow reduced its power over him. The artificial blood substitute Maul provided was sufficient to maintain control, the need to feed on humans receding to background whisper rather than roaring demand. But other aspects of his personality were shifting. The guilt that had once accompanied kills was fading. The moral calculations that had slowed his decision-making were being replaced by tactical assessment divorced from ethical consideration. He was becoming more efficient, more brutal, more willing to choose violence as first option rather than last resort. It should have concerned him more than it did. On the final day of training, Maul brought him to the meditation chamber where this had all begun. The symbols still hurt to perceive directly, their meanings existing partially outside normal dimensional space. "You've learned quickly," Maul said, settling into meditation posture. "Faster than I anticipated. Your supernatural physiology gives you advantages even force sensitivity doesn't provide. You're not bound by the limitations that constrain Jedi or Sith. So I'm ready? Ready to survive? Perhaps? Ready to defeat Vader?" Maul's laugh was sharp. "No. Vader is beyond what 6 weeks of training can prepare you for. He spent decades mastering the dark side, has cybernetic enhancements that exceed even your capabilities, and serves a Sith Lord who's orchestrated galactic domination through century-long planning. You might survive another encounter. You might even injure him seriously. But defeating him, that requires either overwhelming power you don't possess or opportunity that hasn't presented itself." Blade processed that assessment. "Then why train me at all?" "Because survival is sufficient victory in wars of attrition. Every encounter Vader fails to kill you weakens the Empire's aura of invincibility. Every Inquisitor you eliminate reduces their operational capacity. Every Imperial asset you compromise bleeds resources they can't easily replace." Maul's yellow eyes burned with focused intensity. "I'm not training you to defeat Vader in single combat. I'm training you to be the wound that won't heal. The persistent infection the Empire can't quite eliminate. The reminder that their power isn't absolute. Poetic. Practical. The Empire maintains control through fear and overwhelming force. Anything that challenges that narrative, that demonstrates resistance is possible, weakens their foundation." Maul stood, offering his hand. "Your training is complete. Crimson Dawn has new assignment for you. Something that will test everything you've learned." Blade took the offered hand, noting how Maul's grip had changed over 6 weeks. Less testing now, more partnership. The former Sith Lord respected strength, and Blade had proven he possessed it in abundance. "What's the target?" "Not what. Where?" Maul activated a holographic display showing an Imperial installation on a world Blade didn't recognize. An Inquisitor fortress on Noor, where the Empire trains its force-hunting operatives, where they break Jedi who surrender rather than die, where they keep artifacts and prisoners the galaxy isn't supposed to know about. Blade studied the display, his enhanced vision cataloging defensive positions and structural vulnerabilities. The fortress was massive. Kilometers of reinforced duracrete and defensive systems designed to withstand siege and resist infiltration. Attacking it would be suicide, which probably meant Maul wasn't suggesting assault. "Infiltration?" Blade asked. "Liberation?" Maul's smile was predatory. "Crimson Dawn has intelligence suggesting they're holding someone important. Someone whose rescue would embarrass the Empire and provide us with valuable asset. I'm sending you in to retrieve them." "Who?" "You'll know when you find them. Consider it part of the test. Tactical assessment under uncertainty." Maul deactivated the display. "Syndra will pilot you to Noor. You'll have 48 hours to infiltrate, locate the target, and extract. No support, no backup. Just your skills against an entire fortress of Inquisitors. Blade considered refusing. The mission was designed to be nearly impossible. Classic, expendable asset deployment, where success was bonus and failure was acceptable loss. But he'd spent 6 weeks training to fight Force users. Spent 6 weeks becoming more dangerous than he'd been on Earth. Spent 6 weeks learning to channel the darkness that had nearly consumed him on Raxus Secundus. Time to see if the investment had been worthwhile. "When do I leave?" Blade asked. "Immediately. Syndra's waiting at the landing platform." Maul turned toward the chamber's exit, then paused. "Blade, one final lesson before you go." "What?" "The darkness you've embraced? The predatory nature you've stopped suppressing? That's not corruption. That's not the dark side turning you into something you weren't." Maul's yellow eyes reflected the chamber's dim lighting. "That's just you, finally honest about what you've always been. Remember that when you're tempted to feel guilty about the monster you've become." The former Sith Lord departed, leaving Blade alone with meditation symbols and uncomfortable truths. He'd spent 6 weeks becoming more effective, more dangerous, more willing to embrace violence without moral hesitation. Maul claimed that wasn't corruption, just honesty. But standing in that chamber, feeling how easily anger came now, how natural violence felt, how distant his old moral certainty seemed, Blade wondered if there was actually a difference. Maybe corruption was just honesty you weren't ready to accept. Maybe monsters were just predators who'd stopped pretending otherwise. Maybe he'd already crossed every line that mattered, and the training had just helped him recognize it. Blade left the meditation chamber and headed for the landing platform, his weapons checked, his body operating at peak capacity, his mind calculating approaches for an impossible mission. The Inquisitor fortress was waiting. So was whatever came next in his transformation from hunter to something darker. Something that would either save him or damn him. At this point, the distinction hardly mattered. The Fortress Inquisitorius rose from Noor's endless ocean like a monument to Imperial arrogance. A massive structure of black durasteel and reinforced permacrete, designed to withstand orbital bombardment and broadcast the Empire's power to anyone foolish enough to approach. Its defensive systems included automated turrets, overlapping sensor arrays, and patrol craft that circled the installation in precise formations. Blade studied it from 2 kilometers out, treading water that was colder than Raxus Secundus, but warmer than the Arctic insertions he'd performed hunting vampire covens in Siberia. The rebreather kept him functional, his enhanced physiology handling the temperature with minimal discomfort. "You're insane," Syndra had said when he'd outlined the approach plan. "The fortress has underwater sensors, defensive mines, automated systems specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of infiltration. They're designed to prevent normal infiltration," Blade had corrected. "I'm not normal." Now, submerged beneath Noor's waves with the fortress looming ahead, he was discovering whether that confidence had been justified or just arrogance wearing tactical language. The first sensor array was easy. An automated system scanning for large objects and mechanical signatures. Blade's organic approach and minimal equipment profile let him slip through detection thresholds designed for submarines and assault craft. The defensive mines were harder. Pressure-triggered explosives that would detonate if anything heavier than local sea life passed within their kill radius. Blade's enhanced perception let him map the minefield through subtle distortions in water flow and trace electromagnetic signatures his senses could detect. He navigated through gaps that would have been impassable for anyone without supernatural awareness, his body moving with precision that left centimeters of clearance on all sides. 20 minutes of swimming brought him to the fortress's foundation. Massive duracrete pylons driven into the ocean floor, designed to anchor the structure against storms that could sink capital ships. The pylons were smooth, nearly frictionless, treated with coatings that prevented marine growth and climbing. Nearly frictionless wasn't completely frictionless. Blade's enhanced strength let him grip surfaces that would have defeated normal humans, his fingers finding microscopic imperfections and pressure points that provided just enough purchase. He climbed, his body moving up the pylon with controlled determination, salt water streaming from his coat. The fortress's lower levels were maintenance sections, automated systems and droid access points that organic personnel rarely visited. Blade entered through a waste disposal port that was supposedly too small for human infiltration, his enhanced flexibility and willingness to dislocate joints temporarily making the impossible merely agonizing. He emerged into darkness that his enhanced vision rendered in shades of gray and black, his sword already drawn, his enhanced hearing mapping the facility through mechanical sounds and distant footsteps. The fortress held approximately 200 personnel, according to Crimson Dawn's intelligence. Inquisitors, stormtroopers, technical staff, and prisoners whose screams sometimes echoed through ventilation systems. Finding one specific prisoner in that chaos without triggering alarms required perfect execution. Blade moved through maintenance corridors with predatory silence, his enhanced senses tracking patrol patterns and identifying gaps in coverage. The training with Maul had refined his instincts. He wasn't thinking about routes or tactics anymore, just flowing through the fortress like water finding downhill paths. It felt natural, felt right, felt like finally operating without the mental restrictions that had slowed him for decades. He reached the detention levels through ventilation shafts that maintenance droids used, his body compressing through spaces that looked impossible until he was already past them. The cells were visible through grates, duracrete chambers designed to hold force sensitives, equipped with technology that disrupted their abilities and prevented escape. Most cells were empty. A few held prisoners who looked broken, Jedi or Force sensitives who'd surrendered or been captured, their spirits shattered through interrogation and dark side corruption. Blade cataloged them, recognizing potential assets but staying focused on the primary mission. Then he found her. The cell at the corridor's end held a Togruta female. Orange skin, white facial markings, montrals that marked her species, and an expression that combined defiance with exhaustion. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, wearing prisoner garments that had seen better days. But her eyes carried the kind of awareness that came from surviving things that should have broken her. She looked up at the ventilation grate as if she'd known someone was there, her head tilting in curiosity rather than fear. "You're not a droid, not stormtrooper either. Definitely not Inquisitor." Her voice carried hints of an accent Blade didn't recognize. "Which means you're either hallucination from whatever they drugged me with, or you're the rescue I stopped hoping for 3 months ago." Blade dropped from the vent into the corridor, landing with barely a sound. "Rescue, who are you?" "Ahsoka Tano, former Jedi, current pain in the Empire's ass." She stood, moving to the cell's energy barrier with the careful precision of someone who'd tested its limits repeatedly. "And you?" "Blade, current Crimson Dawn operative, former vampire hunter from another galaxy." Ahsoka blinked. "That's either the truth or the most creative lie I've heard in months. I'm going with truth because the Force is suggesting you're something it doesn't quite understand, which tracks with from another galaxy. Can you fight? Can I?" Ahsoka's laugh was sharp. "I survived Order 66, fought in the Clone Wars, trained under Anakin Skywalker before he became Vader. Fighting is basically my resume. Blade processed that. Anakin Skywalker, Vader's former identity. This prisoner had personal connection to the galaxy's most dangerous enforcer, which meant extracting her would have implications beyond simple embarrassment for the Empire. Good. Better missions had complications built in. He examined the cell's control panel, his enhanced vision identifying the access mechanism. Standard Imperial security, retinal scan, access codes, biometric verification, all designed to prevent unauthorized release. His vibroblade made short work of the panel's exterior casing. Underneath, the circuitry was complex, but ultimately just wiring and logic gates. Blade had bypassed Vampire Mansion security systems that were mystically warded and demon-trapped. Electronic locks were simple by comparison. 30 seconds of careful cutting, and the energy barrier flickered and died. Ahsoka stepped through immediately, her movements carrying the controlled aggression of someone ready for violence. Okay, not hallucination. Definitely rescue. She stretched, working mobility back into muscles that had been confined too long. What's the extraction plan? Get you out alive. Everything else is flexible. I like flexible plans. They adapt well to chaos. Ahsoka's expression turned serious. But you should know, there are other prisoners here. Jedi younglings the Empire captured. Force sensitives they're breaking for recruitment into the Inquisitorius. I'm not leaving without attempting to free them. Blade's tactical assessment immediately flagged the complication. Extracting one prisoner was difficult. Extracting multiple prisoners, some probably children, all likely traumatized and potentially uncooperative, was exponentially harder. But he'd spent 6 weeks training with Maul, learning dark side philosophy, becoming comfortable with violence and moral flexibility. He'd also spent 40 years maintaining certain principles, and one of those principles was that you didn't abandon kids to monsters if you could help it. How many? Blade asked. Maybe a dozen. Scattered across multiple cells. Some might be too broken to move quickly. Then we move them slow. Adapt the plan. Blade moved toward the corridor's exit, his enhanced hearing tracking approaching patrol. Stay behind me. Try not to make noise. Kill anyone who gets in our way. Are you always this direct? Found it works better than complicated strategy. Ahsoka smiled, genuine expression that suggested she appreciated the approach. I think I'm going to like working with you. They moved through the detention level with Blade leading, his enhanced senses mapping threats before they materialized. The first patrol, 2 stormtroopers and a guard droid, died before they could trigger alarms. Blade's sword and vibroblade, taking them in coordinated strikes, while Ahsoka watched with the professional assessment of someone evaluating a new ally's capabilities. You're fast, she observed, examining the bodies. Faster than most Force-enhanced warriors I've seen. And those weapons. She indicated his sword. That's not Beskar, but it's stopping energy weapons and cutting through armor like it's warm bread. What is it? Long story. Involves vampires and alchemy. I'll explain when we're not surrounded by enemies. They reached the other cells systematically, Blade's vibroblade opening each lock while Ahsoka assessed prisoners. Some were responsive, young humans and aliens who'd retained enough spirit to recognize rescue when it appeared. Others were catatonic, broken by interrogation and torture that had targeted their connection to the Force. We're taking them all, Ahsoka said, her voice carrying the tone of someone who wasn't arguing. Even the broken ones, especially the broken ones. The Empire doesn't get to keep them. Blade nodded, He'd made similar calls in other contexts, rescuing vampire thralls who were too traumatized to cooperate, extracting cult victims who'd been broken by supernatural predators. You saved who you could and dealt with the complications afterward. They assembled their rescued group in a maintenance corridor. 12 beings ranging from children to young adults, all force-sensitive, all carrying psychological and physical scars from their captivity. Most could walk. A few needed support. One needed carrying. "This is going to be loud," Blade said, adjusting his tactical approach in real time. Quiet extraction isn't possible with this many people. We're going for speed and violence. When alarms trigger, we run for the extraction point and kill anything that gets in our way. "What's the extraction point?" Ahsoka asked. "Ocean. 2 kilometers swim to where Syndra's waiting with submarine transport." "You want these kids to swim 2 kilometers in open ocean while being pursued by Imperial forces?" "You have a better suggestion?" Ahsoka considered, then shook her head. "Actually, no. It's insane enough that they might not anticipate it. Let's do it." The alarm triggered 30 seconds later, when a patrol discovered the bodies Blade had left in his wake. Klaxons screamed through the fortress. Blast doors began sealing, and Blade heard the distinctive sound of stormtrooper units mobilizing. "Run," he said simply, and led the group toward the lower levels. They moved through corridors that were rapidly filling with Imperial personnel, Blade carving a path through opposition with efficiency that had been refined through 6 weeks of brutal training. His sword found gaps in armor. His vibroblade opened throats. His enhanced reflexes let him fight multiple opponents simultaneously while herding rescued prisoners toward their objective. Ahsoka fought beside him, despite lacking weapons, using environment and technique to disable stormtroopers with strikes that suggested years of martial training. She moved like water, her body flowing between opponents, her hands finding pressure points and vulnerable joints with surgical precision. "You're not bad yourself," Blade observed, decapitating a stormtrooper who'd gotten too close to one of the children. "I had good teachers. One of them became the monster we're probably going to face if we don't get out of here fast." As if summoned by her words, Blade felt it. That pressure in reality, that sense of something powerful approaching. Not Vader. The signature was different. Less overwhelming, but still formidable. An Inquisitor. Maybe more than one. "Faster," Blade said, and increased their pace. They reached the waste disposal port Blade had used for entry, finding it still accessible despite the fortress's lockdown. The opening was designed for waste ejection, not human egress, but desperation made people flexible. Blade went through first, helping pull the others through one at a time. Ahsoka came last, her body compressing through the opening with difficulty but determination. Then they were falling, 20 meters straight down into Nur's cold ocean, the fortress looming above them like a vengeful god. "Swim!" Ahsoka shouted, helping the youngest prisoners stay afloat despite water temperature that was approaching hypothermic levels for baseline humans. Blade took point, his enhanced senses navigating toward the extraction coordinates while tracking pursuit. Above, he heard TIE fighters launching, their distinctive scream cutting through ocean wind. Behind, stormtroopers were taking up positions along the fortress's lower levels, preparing to shoot anyone who surfaced. The swim took 15 minutes, an eternity measured in cold water and panicked breathing. With children struggling against exhaustion and terror while Imperial forces converged, Blade had to pull 2 prisoners who'd stopped swimming, his enhanced strength carrying their weight while maintaining forward momentum. Ahsoka worked the rear, encouraging stragglers and using what looked like force techniques to help the weakest maintain enough body heat to survive. Her connection to the Force was clearly still functional, despite 3 months of captivity and whatever techniques the Empire used to suppress it. Syndra's submarine surfaced exactly on schedule, its upper hatch opening to reveal the Twi'lek pilot and a very crowded interior that was about to become more crowded. "You brought 12 extras?" Syndra shouted over the sound of approaching TIE fighters. "This ship is rated for 6. "Then we're overloading it," Blade said, physically lifting children into the submarine. "Move?" They crammed everyone into a space that was claustrophobic even by submarine standards. Bodies pressed together in ways that would have been uncomfortable if they weren't all focused on survival. Syndra sealed the hatch with TIE fighters strafing the water around them, their laser fire superheating seawater into steam. The submarine dove, descending into depths where Imperial sensors struggled to maintain locks. Its hull groaning under pressure it wasn't designed to handle with this much internal weight. "Hyperspace jump in 3 minutes," Syndra reported, her hands working the controls with professional focus. "If we survive that long." Blade settled into the cramped space, his body still processing injuries from the extraction, his mind already calculating implications. They just raided an Inquisitor fortress, freed a former Jedi with personal connection to Vader, and liberated a dozen Force-sensitive prisoners the Empire had been breaking for recruitment. The political and strategic ramifications would be enormous. Vader would take this personally. And somewhere in the fortress above, Inquisitors were filing reports that would reach the Sith Lord within hours, describing the anomaly who'd infiltrated their most secure facility and demonstrated that Imperial power wasn't absolute. Good. Let Vader come. Blade had spent 6 weeks preparing for their next encounter. This time, he wouldn't be fighting just to survive. This time, he'd be fighting to win. The safe house on Mustafar's moon of Jalukan was a calculated insult. Close enough to Vader's fortress world to monitor Imperial communications, far enough to avoid immediate detection, positioned precisely to suggest that Crimson Dawn wasn't afraid of proximity to the galaxy's most dangerous enforcer. Maul had chosen the location deliberately. Blade stood at the viewport watching Mustafar's volcanic surface boil beneath them. Rivers of lava painting the planet in orange and red that reminded him uncomfortably of the Hunger's visual signature. The fortress, Vader's personal stronghold, was visible as a black silhouette against the flames. A monument to dark side power built on a world where the Sith Lord had burned and been reborn as something less and more than human. "You're thinking about attacking it," Ahsoka said, approaching from behind with the silent footwork of someone trained in stealth. She'd recovered quickly from captivity, her Togruta physiology bouncing back with the resilience of youth and Force-enhanced healing. "Crossed my mind," Blade admitted. "Don't." Ahsoka moved to stand beside him, her reflection in the viewport showing an expression that combined respect and concern. Vader's fortress is more than just military installation. It's extension of his will, built on a nexus of dark side power. Attacking it would be like fighting him while he's connected to unlimited energy source. "You sound like you've considered it." "Every day since I learned he was alive, since I discovered what he'd become." Ahsoka's voice carried old pain. "Anakin Skywalker was my master, my friend, the closest thing I had to a brother. And Vader murdered him, took his body, and wears it like a trophy while serving the Emperor who orchestrated everything." Blade processed that, his enhanced hearing catching the genuine anguish beneath her controlled tone. The way Vader talks about Skywalker, it sounds like he considers him a separate person, someone weak he eliminated. That's how the dark side works. It doesn't just corrupt you. It convinces you that corruption was always your true nature. That weakness was the previous version, that power justifies any transformation. Ahsoka turned away from the viewport. I've studied it. Tried to understand how someone who was the chosen one, who was supposed to bring balance to the Force, became the Empire's ultimate weapon. Best answer I've found is that Vader is what happens when you embrace power without wisdom. Sounds familiar. Ahsoka's eyes narrowed. You're different. I can feel it in the Force. Or rather, I can feel the absence where you should be, and that absence carries echoes of darkness. But it's controlled, directed, not the all-consuming corruption that defines true dark side practitioners. Maul trained me. 6 weeks learning to channel anger and hunger into useful violence. Probably crossed a few lines I spent 40 years maintaining. Probably. But you also raided an Inquisitor fortress to rescue prisoners you had no personal connection to. Fought your way through overwhelming opposition to save Force-sensitive children the Empire was breaking. Ahsoka's expression softened slightly. Dark side practitioners don't do that. They'd have left the children, completed the primary objective efficiently, and justified it through cold tactical logic. Maybe I'm just tactically inefficient. Or maybe you're something the Jedi and Sith philosophies don't account for. Someone who can touch darkness without being consumed by it. Who can embrace violence without losing purpose. Ahsoka paused. The Force is having trouble categorizing you. You're neither light nor dark, neither Jedi nor Sith. You're just Blade. And that confuses a cosmic energy field that spent millennia thinking in binary terms. Before Blade could respond, Maul entered the observation deck, his cybernetic legs carrying him with mechanical precision. His yellow eyes swept the room, cataloging positions and body language with the instinctive threat assessment of someone who'd survived through constant vigilance. Ahsoka Tano, Maul said, his voice carrying undertones of recognition. Former Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, survivor of Order 66. Thorn in the Empire's side who's evaded capture longer than most Jedi Masters. He tilted his head. And personal friend of Senator Amidala, which makes your continued existence deeply inconvenient for the Emperor's narrative. Maul, Ahsoka replied, her tone neutral but wary. Former Sith Lord, current criminal mastermind, the man who killed my people on Mandalore and destabilized an entire sector for personal revenge. Should I be grateful you authorized my rescue, or concerned about what you want in return? Both would be appropriate. Maul gestured toward the conference area. We have matters to discuss. The Empire's response to your liberation has been intense. They gathered around a holographic display showing star charts and Imperial communications intercepts. Blade recognized the tactical layout immediately. Force deployments, fleet movements, garrison alerts. The Empire was mobilizing. They've flagged you as priority threat, Maul said, activating footage from the Fortress Inquisitorius. The recording showed Blade fighting through stormtroopers with enhanced speed and surgical lethality, his movements carrying efficiency that security analysts would recognize as professional rather than lucky. The anomaly, who defeated the fifth brother, who survived Vader's personal attention, who infiltrated their most secure facility and extracted a dozen prisoners, including a former Jedi. I'm honored, Blade said dryly. You should be terrified. Maul's expression turned serious. Vader has requested personal authorization from the Emperor to dedicate full resources to your elimination, not capture. Elimination. The Sith Lord has apparently decided you represent sufficient threat to warrant extermination, regardless of potential intelligence value. Ahsoka looked at Blade with new assessment. What did you do to him on Raxus Secundus? Intelligence reports suggested combat engagement, but they were light on details. Fought him. Survived longer than I should have. Bit through his armor and drew blood. Blade paused. Might have challenged his worldview about power and the Force guaranteeing victory. You bit Darth Vader? Ahsoka's voice carried disbelief mixed with inappropriate amusement. Through his armor? While he was trying to kill you? Seemed like a good tactical decision at the time. Maul's laugh was sharp and genuine. I begin to understand why Vader takes such personal interest. You don't just defeat his forces or survive his attacks. You insult him through methods that challenge his fundamental assumptions about combat. The Sith Lord is probably more offended than injured. Good, Blade said. Offended enemies make mistakes. They also dedicate disproportionate resources to revenge. Maul adjusted the holographic display, showing fleet movements converging toward the outer rim. Vader is assembling a task force, 3 Star Destroyers, support craft, and the entire Inquisitorius, minus those currently deployed on other missions. He's creating a net designed to trap you regardless of where you run. Then I won't run. The silence that followed carried weight. Ahsoka and Maul exchanged glances, some communication passing between them that Blade's enhanced perception caught but couldn't fully interpret. You're proposing to face Vader directly, Maul said finally. With what support? What strategy? What possible tactical advantage that didn't exist during your previous encounter? 6 weeks of training you provided, knowledge of his capabilities, and terrain of my choosing rather than his. Blade gestured toward Mustafar below. He lives there, operates from there, probably considers that fortress inviolable. I'm proposing we demonstrate otherwise. You want to attack Vader's personal fortress, Ahsoka said slowly. On Mustafar, where he's connected to dark side nexus that amplifies his power, where he maintains garrison of his most loyal troops, where the environment itself is hostile to organic life. Yes? That's... Ahsoka paused, searching for appropriate description. That's either brilliant tactical psychology or suicide with extra steps. Blade specializes in operations that look like suicide until they succeed, Maul observed. It's why he survived this long. But this... The former Sith Lord studied the fortress's schematic with obvious calculation. This requires more than individual capability. This requires support, distraction, and tactical coordination that Crimson Dawn cannot provide without exposing our entire organization. Then don't provide it through Crimson Dawn. Blade turned to Ahsoka. You mentioned the Empire's narrative, that they claim all Jedi are dead, that Order 66 was successful. What happens if a former Jedi appears on Vader's doorstep, very much alive, demanding confrontation? Ahsoka's eyes widened with understanding. It undermines the Emperor's propaganda. Suggests Jedi survival is more widespread than reported. Forces Vader to respond personally rather than delegating to subordinates. And while he's distracted with you, Blade continued, I infiltrate his fortress, compromise his infrastructure, and create circumstances where we can face him on more equal footing than open combat would allow. You're proposing to use me as bait, Ahsoka said. I'm proposing we both be bait, simultaneously, from different vectors. Force him to split attention between threats he can't ignore. Maul was nodding slowly, his tactical mind clearly working through implications. The fortress has defensive systems designed to repel fleet assault or ground invasion. But simultaneous infiltration and frontal challenge? He pulled up more detailed schematics. the psychological impact alone would be significant. Vader prides himself on absolute security. Demonstrating that his personal stronghold is vulnerable would wound him more effectively than physical injury. "And if this kills us?" Ahsoka asked. "Then you die fighting the monster who murdered your master and corrupted everything the Jedi stood for," Blade said. "And I die doing what I've done for 40 years, hunting something more powerful than me and refusing to back down. There are worse ways to go." "There are also smarter ways to survive," Ahsoka countered. "But..." She studied the fortress schematic, her expression transitioning from skepticism to calculation. "But if we're going to face him eventually, and we are because Vader doesn't forget and doesn't stop, better to do it on our terms than wait for his net to close." Maul deactivated the display, his yellow eyes moving between them with something approaching respect. "I will provide what support Crimson Dawn can offer without compromising our security. Transport, intelligence, equipment. But once you commit to this operation, you're isolated. If you fail, we cannot extract you. If you succeed but need evacuation, we cannot risk exposure. You'll be alone on a world that exists to serve Vader's will." "Alone together," Ahsoka said, glancing at Blade. Not sure if that's reassuring or just shared delusion. "Both," Blade said. "When do we leave?" 48 hours, Maul replied. "Time to prepare equipment and finalize approach vectors. Time to ensure you understand this isn't assassination mission or intelligence gathering. This is statement operation, demonstrating that Vader is vulnerable, that the Empire's ultimate weapon can be challenged, that power has limits." "And if we actually kill him?" Blade asked. Maul's smile was sharp and carried decades of accumulated rage. "Then you'll have accomplished what I failed to do on Mandalore, what the Jedi Order failed to do during Order 66, what countless beings across the galaxy have dreamed about while living under Imperial tyranny. You'll have removed the Emperor's right hand, his enforcer, his ultimate weapon." "That would make us heroes," Ahsoka observed. "Or targets for something worse than Vader," Maul countered. "The Emperor didn't survive for decades through relying on a single asset. If Vader falls, Sidious will unleash whatever he's been keeping in reserve. And trust me, a Sith Lord who orchestrated the galaxy's enslavement has reserves you don't want to meet." Blade processed that, his enhanced cognition running probability calculations. Killing Vader would solve immediate problems while creating new ones. Surviving Vader while demonstrating his vulnerability might be more strategically valuable. Either way, the next 48 hours would determine whether he'd evolved enough through Maul's training to face the galaxy's ultimate predator on more equal terms, or whether he'd just spent 6 weeks preparing for an elaborately choreographed death. "I need to prepare," Blade said, moving toward the exit. "Check equipment, synthesize more serum, plan approach vectors. And I need to meditate," Ahsoka added. "Commune with the Force. Make peace with possibly dying on the world where my master burned and was reborn as the monster I'm about to fight." They departed in different directions, leaving Maul alone in the observation deck, watching Mustafar's volcanic surface. The former Sith Lord's expression was unreadable, his thoughts hidden behind decades of practiced concealment. But if anyone had been reading his body language carefully, they might have noticed something unusual. Hope. Fragile, dangerous, probably foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, these two broken warriors could accomplish what armies and Jedi masters and organized rebellions had failed to achieve. Not through overwhelming power or superior tactics or force-granted destiny, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that some monsters were unkillable. Outside, Mustafar burned. Inside, two predators prepared to hunt the ultimate prey. And somewhere in his fortress of black stone and dark side power, Darth Vader felt a disturbance in the Force. Not a vision, not a warning, just an instinctive recognition that something was approaching. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that refused to die. The Sith Lord rose from his meditation chamber, his mechanical breathing filling the silence with rhythmic certainty. Let them come. He would be ready. Mustafar's atmosphere was breathable but toxic. Sulfur compounds and volcanic ash turned every breath into an act of survival for baseline humans. Blade's enhanced physiology filtered it automatically, his hybrid metabolism treating lethal environment as merely unpleasant. Beside him, Ahsoka breathed through a rebreather mask that made her look like some kind of alien insect, her montrals twitching as she used the Force to sense their surroundings. They'd landed 5 kilometers from Vader's fortress, using a stolen Imperial shuttle that Crimson Dawn had repurposed with sensor-dampening technology. The approach had been harrowing, navigating through Mustafar's volcanic activity while avoiding Imperial patrol craft that circled the planet in defensive patterns. Now they stood on black rock that was still warm from recent lava flow. The fortress visible in the distance as a massive silhouette against rivers of molten stone. TIE fighters circled it like carrion birds, and Blade's enhanced vision counted at least 20 stormtroopers on the visible ramparts, minimum garrison. Vader clearly believed his reputation and the fortress's defenses were sufficient deterrent. Time to prove him wrong. The plan is insane, Ahsoka said, not for the first time. Her voice was muffled by the rebreather, but still carried clearly. You understand that, right? We're about to assault a fortress designed to be impregnable, defended by the Empire's most elite troops, and occupied by the single most dangerous being in the galaxy. Yep, Blade said, checking his equipment one final time. Sword, vibroblade, blaster pistols with fresh power cells, grenades both concussive and incendiary, and 6 doses of serum synthesized specifically for high-stress combat. Everything he'd need to either succeed spectacularly or die memorably. And you're okay with that? Been doing impossible things for 40 years. This is just impossible with better special effects. Ahsoka laughed. Short, sharp sound that suggested she was balancing terror and exhilaration. I trained under Anakin Skywalker. He specialized in impossible tactics and somehow succeeding through sheer audacity and luck. You remind me of him. Before... She gestured vaguely toward the fortress. Before he became that. Tell me about him, Blade said, beginning the approach toward the fortress. Not Vader, Skywalker. What was he like before the fall? They moved across Mustafar's volcanic terrain with Blade leading, his enhanced senses mapping safe paths through heat and instability. Ahsoka followed, her Force sensitivity giving her precognitive awareness of dangers his purely physical perception might miss. Anakin was passionate, Ahsoka said after a moment. Everything he did completely. When he fought with total commitment. When he cared about someone, he cared with his entire being. The Jedi Council worried that passion would lead to darkness, but it also made him the most effective warrior in the Order. What changed? Fear, attachment. He loved Senator Amidala, my friend Padme, and the Jedi Code forbade such connections. When he had visions of her dying, the fear consumed him. The Emperor exploited that fear, promised power to prevent her death. And Anakin. Ahsoka's voice broke slightly. Anakin chose power over principle, became Vader, And in the process, he lost everything he'd been trying to save. Blade processed that, his tactical mind recognizing patterns. So Vader isn't just the Emperor's weapon. He's a broken man trapped inside armor, using power to fill voids that power created. Exactly. Which makes him more dangerous, not less. A man with nothing to lose fights with abandon that victory-focused opponents can't match. They reached the fortress's outer perimeter, a zone where volcanic activity had been artificially shaped into defensive advantage, creating channels of lava that would funnel attackers into kill zones. Blade studied the layout with enhanced vision, noting patrol patterns and automated defense systems. "Remember the plan," Blade said. "You go loud, approach the main entrance, announce yourself. Demand Vader face you. Draw his attention and as much of the garrison as possible. I infiltrate during the chaos, reach the fortress's central systems, and compromise his infrastructure. And when he kills me? Then you'll have bought me time to complete the mission." Blade's tone was matter of fact. "But you're not going to die. You survived Order 66, you'll survive this. Anakin was my master. Vader is what he became. Fighting him." Ahsoka's hands trembled slightly. "Fighting him means accepting that the person I loved like a brother is truly dead. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But either way, the monster wearing his body needs to be confronted." Blade placed a hand on her shoulder. Brief contact, human connection before violence began. "You ready?" Ahsoka took a deep breath, removed her rebreather to reveal a face that combined determination with old grief, and ignited her weapons. Twin white lightsabers that blazed like captured starlight against Mustafar's hellish backdrop. "I'm ready." She walked toward the fortress's main entrance with measured steps, her presence in the Force blazing like a beacon that every Force sensitive on the planet would feel. Blade felt it, even with his Force blindness. A pressure shift, a sense of something profound announcing itself. The garrison responded immediately. Alarms screamed. Stormtroopers emerged from defensive positions. Automated turrets swiveled toward the approaching figure who just declared war on Vader's personal stronghold. Ahsoka didn't slow, didn't stop, just kept walking with white blades raised, her voice carrying across the volcanic plain with Force-enhanced projection. "Vader, I am Ahsoka Tano, Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, and I have come to face the monster that wears his corpse. Show yourself or prove that you're nothing but the Emperor's coward hiding behind reputation and power." The insult was calculated, perfect, impossible to ignore. Blade used the distraction exactly as planned, moving along the fortress's perimeter with enhanced speed that turned him into a blur of motion. The garrison's attention was focused on the impossible audacity of a lone Jedi challenging Vader directly. Nobody was watching for infiltration from alternate vectors. He scaled the fortress's exterior wall, black stone that radiated heat like a living thing. Designed to deter climbing through environmental hostility rather than structural impossibility, Blade's enhanced strength and heat resistance made it merely difficult instead of lethal. He reached a maintenance access point 3 stories up, his vibro blade making quick work of the lock. Inside, the fortress was a maze of corridors and chambers that served Vader's purposes. Meditation rooms, combat training facilities, detention cells, and at its heart, the command center where the Sith Lord coordinated Imperial operations across multiple sectors. Blade moved through it like smoke. His training with Maul allowing him to operate on pure instinct that Force precognition couldn't easily predict. He killed sentries with silent efficiency, stormtroopers who'd drawn the short straw of interior guard duty, probably thinking they were safe inside Vader's personal stronghold. They were wrong. Outside, he heard the sounds of combat escalating. Ahsoka engaging the garrison, her lightsabers deflecting blaster fire, her presence in the Force drawing every defender toward the main entrance. The distraction was working perfectly. Too perfectly. Blade's instincts screamed warnings a second before reality proved them correct. He rounded a corner and found himself facing not stormtroopers, not automated defenses, but something worse. 5 Inquisitors stood in formation, their red lightsabers already ignited, their expressions carrying the smug certainty of beings who'd anticipated exactly this approach. "The anomaly," the lead Inquisitor said. A Padawan with elongated features and eyes that glowed yellow with dark side corruption. "Lord Vader predicted you would attempt infiltration while your Jedi ally provided distraction. He finds your tactics predictable." Blade's hand moved to his sword, his enhanced cognition processing impossible odds. 5 Inquisitors in a corridor that provided no maneuvering room, no backup, no escape routes that didn't lead through plasma blades designed to cut through nearly anything. "Predictable," Blade repeated. "That's interesting. Because if Vader predicted my approach, he'd know I predicted his prediction." The Inquisitor's expressions flickered with uncertainty. Blade pressed the detonator on his belt. The charges he'd placed during infiltration, small, precisely positioned explosive devices that had been hidden in structural weak points identified through Crimson Dawn's intelligence, detonated simultaneously. Not enough to destroy the fortress, but sufficient to compromise its integrity in ways that created cascading failures. Blast doors sealed unexpectedly, power conduits overloaded, automated systems went haywire as electrical fires spread through critical infrastructure. And most importantly, the section of corridor the Inquisitors occupied suddenly found itself structurally unsound. The floor collapsed, duracrete and metal dropping 3 levels into lava channels that ran beneath the fortress as part of Mustafar's natural geology. The Inquisitors fell, their force powers letting them survive the drop, but leaving them separated and disoriented. Blade kept moving, his enhanced agility carrying him across the collapsing section before it fully gave way. Behind him, the fortress was transforming from impregnable stronghold into chaotic death trap as sabotage cascaded through systems designed to withstand external assault but vulnerable to internal compromise. He reached the command center to find it heavily fortified but temporarily unguarded. The garrison had been pulled to deal with Ahsoka's frontal assault, and now the fortress's catastrophic systems failures. Blade's vibroblade opened the sealed door in seconds, and he entered a chamber dominated by holographic displays and tactical interfaces that coordinated Imperial operations across the sector. Smashing it all would have been satisfying, but tactically insufficient. Instead, Blade activated his stolen datapad, loaded with slicing programs Crimson Dawn's best technicians had developed, and began downloading everything. Intelligence reports, fleet deployments, communications protocols, every secret Vader had stored in his personal fortress, now being copied for Crimson Dawn's use. The download would take 3 minutes. 3 minutes Blade didn't have, because his enhanced hearing was already tracking new arrivals. Heavy footsteps, mechanical breathing, a presence that made reality feel heavier. Vader had disengaged from Ahsoka's distraction and was coming for him personally. Blade drew his sword, watching the command center's entrance with enhanced perception that rendered every detail in supernatural clarity. The download progress bar showed 70% complete. 2 minutes. The door exploded inward, not physically destroyed, but ripped from its moorings through telekinetic power that treated reinforced durasteel like paper. Vader walked through the opening with his lightsaber ignited, red blade casting the command center in hellish light. "Clever," the Sith Lord said, his mechanical voice carrying undertones that might have been grudging respect. "Using my fortress's infrastructure against itself, creating chaos that prevents coordinated defense, stealing intelligence while I deal with distractions." Vader raised his free hand, and Blade felt invisible pressure close around his throat. "But ultimately futile. You're trapped, alone, and I have no intention of letting you escape this time." The Force choke tightened. Blade's healing factor delayed the effects, his enhanced physiology buying precious seconds. But biology had limits. His vision was tunneling, black spots appearing as oxygen deprivation approached critical levels. The download hit 95%. Blade did the only thing he could. He threw his sword. Not at Vader, the Sith Lord would deflect it easily with his lightsaber. Instead, Blade threw it at the command center's power core, the central fusion reactor that powered all the fortress's systems. The silver blade punched through reinforced shielding that should have been impenetrable, its edge enhanced by whatever alchemical properties made it capable of parrying lightsabers. The reactor didn't explode. Fusion containment didn't work that way. But it did begin catastrophic shutdown protocols as safety systems detected core breach, which meant the fortress had approximately 30 seconds before total power failure. Vader recognized the threat immediately, his force choke releasing as he turned to address the more immediate problem. Blade used that moment, gasping for air, his healing factor processing oxygen deprivation, to grab the datapad as the download hit 100% and sprint for the nearest exit. Behind him, Vader was doing something with the Force, his power buying time to contain the reactor breach. But even Vader couldn't instantly repair a fusion core, and the fortress's systems were already failing. Lights died. Blast doors sealed randomly, automated defenses shut down. And somewhere in the structure's depths, Blade heard the distinctive sound of lava beginning to breach containment. He ran through corridors that were rapidly becoming death traps, his enhanced senses the only thing preventing him from falling into newly opened chasms or being crushed by collapsing ceilings. The fortress was eating itself. Decades of construction collapsing under cascading failures that Vader's power alone couldn't prevent. Blade found Ahsoka fighting her way through the main entrance, her white lightsabers dancing between incoming blaster fire. She looked exhausted, burned, pushed to her limits, but alive, functional, and furious. "Time to go," Blade shouted. "Really? I was just starting to enjoy myself." Ahsoka's sarcasm was thick enough to cut. She deflected a final volley of blaster fire, then Force pushed a group of stormtroopers backward with power that sent them tumbling across the volcanic terrain. They ran together, two predators extracting from a collapsing stronghold while the galaxy's most dangerous enforcer dealt with infrastructure failures that threatened to bury him in his own fortress. Behind them, the structure groaned. Portions of wall collapsed into lava flows. Automated systems sparked and died. And through it all, Blade felt Vader's presence, not pursuing, but radiating fury so intense it seemed to make the air heavier. They reached the extraction point where Syndra waited with transport, the Twi'lek pilot's expression suggesting she thought they were both insane, but was professional enough not to say it during active extraction. "Did you get it?" Syndra asked as they boarded. Blade tossed her the datapad containing Vader's complete intelligence archives. "Got it. Plus, we just compromised his fortress and made him look mortal. Call it a productive day." The transport lifted off as TIE fighters scrambled to intercept, their response delayed by the fortress's systems failures. Syndra's piloting carried them through volcanic columns and lava plumes that provided cover from pursuit, her skill turning environmental hazards into tactical advantages. They broke atmosphere with 3 TIE fighters still in pursuit, their laser fire scorching the transport's hull. Then space, then hyperspace jump coordinates locked, then reality twisted and they were gone, leaving Mustafar and its wounded master behind. In the transport's crew compartment, Blade and Ahsoka sat in exhausted silence. They'd survived. Had actually survived attacking Vader's personal fortress and extracting with intelligence that would damage the Empire's operations across multiple sectors. "We did it," Ahsoka said finally, her voice carrying disbelief. "We actually did it." "Did we?" Blade asked. His enhanced senses were already processing something his rational mind didn't want to acknowledge. "Because I'm pretty sure we just declared total war on the galaxy's ultimate weapon. And next time we meet, Vader's going to be prepared for every trick we just used." "Next time," Ahsoka agreed. "But not today. Today, we survived. And we proved that Vader can be hurt, can be challenged, can be made to look vulnerable." She was right. The mission had been about more than intelligence gathering or tactical victory. It had been about demonstrating that the Empire's ultimate weapon wasn't invincible, that Vader's power had limits, that resistance was possible even against overwhelming force. But Blade's instincts, honed through 40 years of hunting supernatural predators, were screaming that they'd just escalated beyond any point of return. Vader wouldn't just hunt them now. He'd dedicate every resource, every asset, every moment to their destruction. They'd wounded the monster. Now they'd have to face what wounded monsters became. The Crimson Dawn's safe house on Ord Mantell. Different from the one Blade had used months ago, this one deeper in the criminal underground, became a fortress of paranoid preparation over the following weeks. Maul had moved them there immediately after the Mustafar operation, recognizing that Vader's response would be swift and overwhelming. He was right. Imperial forces mobilized across the Outer Rim with intensity that suggested personal vendetta rather than strategic necessity. Star destroyers appeared in systems where Blade and Ahsoka had never been, conducting searches that terrorized local populations and demonstrated that Vader's fury transcended tactical judgment. The Inquisitorius was recalled from assignments across the galaxy, consolidated into hunter-killer teams dedicated to one objective: find the anomaly and the former Jedi, and eliminate them with extreme prejudice. Blade spent the time synthesizing serum in bulk, creating stockpiles that would last months rather than weeks. The artificial blood substitute Maul provided was stable now, refined through trial and error into compounds that satisfied his hybrid physiology without requiring human feeding. The hunger was manageable. Not gone, never gone, but controlled through chemistry and discipline that Maul's training had reinforced. But control came with a price. Every dose of serum, every suppression of his vampire nature, every moment spent maintaining humanity rather than embracing predation. It all accumulated as psychological weight that grew heavier with each passing day. He was becoming what he'd always feared: a monster in human clothing, wearing morality like a mask while the beast beneath grew stronger through acknowledgement rather than suppression. "You're thinking too much," Ahsoka said, entering the makeshift laboratory where Blade worked. She'd recovered fully from Mustafar, her Togruta physiology and force-enhanced healing erasing physical damage. Psychological damage was harder to quantify. "I can't read your thoughts. You're still that weird void in the Force. But your body language suggests existential crisis. Just wondering when I crossed the line from hunter to monster," Blade said, not looking up from the synthesizer. 40 years maintaining certain principles, 6 weeks with Maul and 2 months in this galaxy later, I'm not sure I recognize what I've become. Ahsoka settled onto a supply crate, her legs swinging in a gesture that made her look younger than her years. Want to know what the Force tells me about you? The Force that I don't register in? The Force that you exist outside of, which is different. You're like a blank space in a painting, the negative space that defines the positive. And when I focus on that space, when I try to understand what you are, the Force suggests something interesting. Which is? You're what happens when someone embraces darkness without being consumed by it. You've touched power that should corrupt, vampire nature, dark side training, violence as primary problem-solving method, but somehow maintained core identity. You're proof that the Jedi and Sith are both wrong about the fundamental nature of power and corruption. Blade finally looked up. The Jedi would say, I'm corrupted and don't recognize it yet. The Sith would say I'm weak for maintaining any moral framework at all. What makes your interpretation more valid? Because I've walked between both philosophies. Trained as a Jedi, learned their limitations, left the Order before it fell, and now exist outside their framework entirely. Ahsoka's expression turned serious. The Jedi claimed attachment led to darkness. Anakin proved them right by falling to save Padme. But he fell because he was never taught to handle attachment, just to suppress it. You've been handling darkness your entire life, not suppressing it, not embracing it completely, just coexisting with it. Coexisting with the hunger that almost made me kill Syndra. That made me slaughter stormtroopers with enthusiasm I probably shouldn't have felt. That makes violence feel natural instead of necessary. Violence is natural. It's a tool like any other. The morality comes from how and when you use it, not from pretending it doesn't exist. Ahsoka stood, moving to the viewport that showed Ord Mantell's urban sprawl. I've killed people, Blade. Lots of people. Some deserved it. Some were just in the wrong place, serving the wrong cause. The Jedi taught me to feel guilty about that. To believe that taking life was failure, that true mastery meant finding non-lethal solutions. And then Order 66 happened, and I learned that non-lethal solutions don't work when your enemies are trying to commit genocide. So you're saying morality is contextual. I'm saying morality is personal. You can have principles, should have principles, but pretending those principles are universal truths rather than individual choices is the delusion that broke both the Jedi and the Sith. She turned back to face him. You're afraid of becoming a monster. That fear is what separates you from actual monsters. Monsters don't worry about corruption. They just consume and justify it afterward. Before Blade could respond, Maul entered the laboratory with his characteristic mechanical precision. His expression carried urgency poorly concealed beneath disciplined neutrality. Vader has found us, Maul said without preamble. Not this specific location, but Ord Mantell. His fleet entered orbit 30 minutes ago. He's conducting systematic ground searches, sector by sector, and will reach this district within 6 hours. Blade felt his enhanced physiology shift into combat readiness automatically. Heart rate increasing, adrenaline production spiking, healing factor preparing for imminent damage. Evacuation? Already compromised. Vader's blockading the spaceport. Every ship trying to leave is being boarded and searched. He's willing to terrorize the entire planet's population to find you. Maul's yellow eyes reflected the laboratory's harsh lighting. This is no longer tactical operation. This is vendetta. The Sith Lord has decided your existence is personal insult that requires immediate resolution regardless of collateral damage. Then we give him what he wants, Ahsoka said, her voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who'd made peace with impossible decisions. We face him, together. End this one way or another. You'll die, Maul stated flatly. Both of you. Vader is operating with full Imperial support on planet where he controls orbital superiority and ground assets. Even if you survive the initial confrontation, unlikely, you'll be trapped with no extraction and no reinforcements. Then we die, Blade said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. Better than running forever. Better than letting him terrorize innocent populations because he's hunting us. Better than waiting for the moment when our luck runs out and he catches us anyway. Maul studied them both with an expression that mixed calculation with something that might have been respect. You understand this serves my purposes as well. If you wound Vader significantly before dying, Crimson Dawn benefits from the Emperor's weapon being compromised. If you somehow kill him, monumentally unlikely, the power vacuum serves our interests. Your deaths are acceptable cost for potential strategic gain. We know, Ahsoka said. We've always known. You're using us just like we're using your resources. It's been mutually exploitative relationship from the start. Good. Honesty is refreshing. Maul activated a tactical display showing Ord Mantell's urban layout. If you're committed to this suicide, at least choose ground that gives you marginal advantage. The industrial sector has abandoned warehouses, vertical terrain, and enough civilians that Vader might hesitate to use maximum force. Vader doesn't hesitate, Blade corrected. But terrain that limits his mobility and force projection gives us something. What else? I can provide distraction. Crimson Dawn has assets on Ord Mantell. Gangs, corrupt officials, criminal infrastructure. I'll trigger simultaneous incidents across the city. Pull garrison forces away from your confrontation zone. Buy you minutes rather than hours, but minutes might be sufficient. And if we win? Ahsoka asked. If you win, transport will be waiting at coordinates I'll transmit. Automated systems, no crew to compromise. You'll have exactly one opportunity to reach it before Imperial reinforcements arrive. Maul's expression turned deadly serious. But understand, if you're captured, Crimson Dawn will deny all connection. If you're killed, we'll use your deaths in propaganda, but provide no vengeance. Your assets, not family. Useful assets, but ultimately expendable. Touching speech, Blade said dryly. Really builds morale. Maul's laugh was sharp. I'm not building morale. I'm ensuring you understand reality before walking into confrontation that will probably kill you. The Jedi built their students up with rhetoric about cosmic destiny and the Force's will. I prefer students who survive through clear-eyed assessment of actual circumstances. He has a point, Ahsoka admitted. Depressing point, but valid. They spent the next 3 hours preparing, checking weapons, synthesizing final serum doses, reviewing tactical approaches for a fight they all knew was barely survivable. Blade felt his predatory nature rising, the hunger sharpening his senses and reflexes in anticipation of violence. 6 months ago, that would have concerned him. Now it just felt like preparation. Maul's training had taught him to channel darkness. Mustafar had taught him that Vader could be hurt. And 40 years of hunting supernatural predators had taught him that the most dangerous prey were the ones who thought themselves unkillable. Time to demonstrate that lesson one final time. They moved through Ord Mantell's industrial sector as Maul's promised distractions erupted across the city. Gang warfare in the commercial district, explosions in the spaceport, coordinated riots that pulled garrison forces away from their systematic search. The chaos bought them time and positioned them in abandoned manufacturing complex that offered vertical terrain and multiple combat zones. Then they waited. Vader arrived exactly on schedule, his presence announced by TIE fighter screams and the mechanical breathing that carried across the industrial wasteland. He came alone, no stormtroopers, no Inquisitors, no backup. Just the Dark Lord of the Sith walking through rusted machinery and broken dreams with his lightsaber ignited, his confidence absolute. "I knew you would be here." Vader's voice echoed through the complex, mechanically distorted but carrying undertones of something approaching satisfaction. "Knew you would stop running." The anomaly and the failed Padawan, standing together against power you cannot comprehend. It's almost poetic. Blade and Ahsoka emerged from concealment 20 meters apart, flanking Vader's position, their weapons ready. Ahsoka's white lightsabers blazed in the complex's dim lighting. Blade's silver sword caught shadows and reflected them in patterns that seemed to move independently. "Anakin," Ahsoka said, her voice carrying across the distance with force enhancement. "I know you're still in there, somewhere beneath the armor and rage and decades of serving monsters. I know you can hear me." "Anakin Skywalker is dead," Vader replied, his tone allowing no argument. "I destroyed him, burned away his weakness, became something stronger through the dark side's power. You should understand, you abandoned his teachings yourself, left the Jedi Order, rejected his instruction. I left because the Order was flawed, because their philosophy was too rigid. But I never stopped believing in what you taught me. That compassion and strength aren't opposites, that power without wisdom is just destruction, that caring about people makes us stronger rather than weaker. Then you learned nothing." Vader's lightsaber rose to combat position. "And you will die with those delusions intact." He attacked. Not with the overwhelming power he demonstrated on Raxus Secundus or the calculated precision from their previous encounters. This was rage-given form, decades of accumulated fury channeled through lightsaber technique and dark side power. Ahsoka met him blade to blade, her white lightsabers weaving defensive patterns that barely contained his assault. Blade attacked from the flank, his sword seeking gaps in Vader's defense while the Sith Lord was committed to Ahsoka's position. The three-way combat was chaos. Lightsabers painting the complex in colors of red and white. Blade's sword adding silver lightning to the mix. All three combatants operating at speeds that exceeded human capability. Blade's enhanced reflexes let him match force-enhanced combat. His training with Maul giving him techniques that made his attacks unpredictable, even to precognition. Ahsoka fought with desperate skill, her connection to the Force screaming warnings that she barely processed fast enough to survive. Every exchange brought her closer to death. Vader's power exceeded anything she'd faced, his rage focused into precision that made the Inquisitors look like amateurs. "You were my student," Vader said, his mechanical voice somehow carrying emotion despite distortion. "I taught you everything, and you abandoned me. Abandoned the Order. Let it fall while you hid. I survived." Ahsoka's response came between blade exchanges that left her arms trembling from impact force. "I survived because I learned that the Jedi way wasn't the only way. Because I stopped letting fear of darkness control me. Then embrace it fully." Vader's free hand extended, Force lightning erupting in blue-white fury that converged on both opponents. "Stop pretending you're different from what you've become." Ahsoka caught the lightning on her lightsabers. the energy dispersing through the blades in a technique that probably would have impressed her former master if he was still capable of such emotions. Blade rolled beneath the attack, came up inside Vader's guard, and drove his vibroblade toward the vulnerable joint between helmet and chest armor. The blade found flesh, drawing blood that was still red, despite everything Vader had become. The Sith Lord's response was telekinetic fury. Blade felt himself lifted and hurled across the complex with force that would have shattered normal human bones. He crashed through rusted machinery, his healing factor processing damage in real time, and was back on his feet in seconds. But Vader was already on Ahsoka, his lightsaber moving in patterns designed to kill rather than wound. She defended desperately, her skill insufficient against overwhelming power and rage, her force precognition barely giving her the split seconds needed to survive. "You cannot win," Vader stated, driving her backward. "Even together, even with your anomalous ally, you face power that has conquered galaxies. I am the Emperor's will made manifest. I am..." Blade shot him. The blaster bolt hit Vader's shoulder from behind, the shot calculated to wound rather than kill, but precise enough to disrupt his concentration. The Sith Lord stumbled, his lightsaber attack faltering for just a moment. Ahsoka used that moment. Her lightsaber came around in an arc that took Vader across the chest, the white blade cutting through armor that should have been impenetrable, finding the vulnerable spot where years of damage and repairs had created weaknesses. Vader screamed, not in pain, but in fury that transcended physical sensation. The sound was mechanical and organic simultaneously, carrying decades of accumulated rage and loss. Then everything exploded. The Force erupted from Vader in a wave of telekinetic power that sent both opponents flying, machinery tearing from moorings, the entire complex groaning under pressure that treated reality like a suggestion. Blade felt his ribs crack despite enhanced durability. Ahsoka hit a support column hard enough to leave an impression. When the chaos settled, Vader stood in a crater of his own making, his armor scorched, his breathing labored, blood seeping from wounds that would have killed baseline humans. But alive. Still standing. "Impressive," the Sith Lord said, his mechanical voice carrying something that might have been grudging respect. "You've wounded me twice now. Demonstrated that determination can bridge the gap between capability and necessity. But it ends here." He raised both hands, gathering the dark side for an attack that would kill them both regardless of healing factors or force protection. Then the building exploded. Not metaphorically. Literally exploded. Charges that Blade had placed during their preparation detonating simultaneously, bringing thousands of tons of industrial infrastructure down on all three combatants. Blade had maybe 2 seconds of consciousness before debris buried him. Enough time to register that he'd just dropped a building on Darth Vader, that this was either brilliant tactics or the dumbest thing he'd ever done, and that survival was now a question of whether his healing factor could process being crushed under architecture. Then darkness, pain, the sound of mechanical breathing, faint but persistent, and the hunger, roaring louder than it had in months, demanding he feed immediately or die. Blade regained consciousness, buried under 3 tons of Duracrete, his healing factor working overtime to keep him alive, while industrial debris slowly crushed him. His enhanced senses cataloged the damage. Ribs broken, left lung collapsed, spine fractured in 2 places, internal bleeding that would have killed him minutes ago if he was still human. The vampire side of his nature was screaming now, demanding immediate feeding to fuel regeneration that exceeded even supernatural limits. The serum was long gone, his synthetic blood substitute burned through in seconds of catastrophic healing. What remained was the hunger, pure and primal, offering him a choice: feed or die. He felt heartbeats nearby, faint struggling but present. Ahsoka was alive somewhere in the wreckage. Her presence in the Force a flickering candle that even Blade's Force blindness could somehow detect. And closer, much closer, another heartbeat, mechanical rhythm overlaid with organic pulse. Vader? The Sith Lord was trapped in the debris too, his cybernetic body maintaining function while organic components struggled to survive. Blood was in the air, fresh and carrying the dark side corruption that made it taste wrong but satisfying to Blade's predatory senses. The hunger offered a solution. Drain Vader. Take the blood and life force, fuel regeneration, become powerful enough to escape the debris and extract Ahsoka. Simple, efficient. Survival through predation, just like evolution had designed him. It would mean crossing the line he'd maintained for 40 years. Feeding on a human being, even a human being who become a monster, who deserved death more than anyone Blade had ever hunted, who'd killed billions and enslaved entire worlds. But still technically human. Still possessing enough organic biology to qualify as the prey he'd sworn never to feed on. The choice crystallized in Blade's oxygen-deprived, half-crushed mind. Die with principles intact, or survive by becoming the monster. Do it. Vader's voice came through the debris, mechanical breathing labored, but still functional. I can feel your hunger, your predatory nature demanding sustenance. You're dying, and I'm convenient prey. Take my blood. Prove that all your moral posturing was just theater. Trying to reverse psychology me into not killing you. Blade managed through a throat that was still healing from being crushed. Weak. I'm trying to demonstrate truth. That survival transcends morality. That when existence is threatened, principles evaporate. You're no different from any predator, just better at justifying it. Blade felt his body continuing to fail, despite his healing factor's desperate efforts. Vader was right about one thing. Without immediate energy, his regeneration would consume itself, trying to repair damage faster than his reserves could sustain. He had maybe minutes before organ failure became irreversible, even for vampire physiology. Then Ahsoka's voice echoed through the wreckage, weak but determined. Blade? Don't. Don't let him make you into what he is. Don't prove his worldview correct. I'm dying, Blade said, not sure if she could even hear him. Without feeding, I'm dead in minutes. With it, I survive. Tactical decision. Tactical decision is just rationalization. Just like Anakin rationalized falling to the dark side to save Padme, just like every monster justifies their choices through necessity. Ahsoka's presence in the Force flickered, but didn't fade. You've spent 40 years maintaining a line that separated you from what you hunted. Don't erase that because dying is inconvenient. The hunger roared its disagreement. His body demanded fuel. His vampire nature insisted that survival was the only morality that mattered. The maintaining principles while dying was just elaborate suicide. But underneath the biological imperatives and the predatory screaming, Blade heard Whistler's voice from decades past. You don't feed on humans. That's the line. Cross it once, and there's no going back. You become what you hunt. And then somebody else has to hunt you. The old man had been right about a lot of things. Blade made his choice. He activated the emergency beacon on his belt, the device Maul had provided for extraction, now transmitting coordinates through tons of debris that should have blocked the signal but was just thin enough to let it through. Then he focused his remaining energy not on feeding, but on using his enhanced strength to shift debris. Not escaping. He couldn't escape. His body was too damaged. But creating enough space for the rescue team to extract them. All three of them. Even Vader. "You're an idiot," the Sith Lord said, his mechanical breathing becoming more labored. "Choosing death over survival, proving nothing except weakness. Proving that I'm not like you," Blade managed. "That survival at any cost isn't survival worth having. That maintaining humanity, even supernatural humanity, matters more than just existing." His healing factor was failing now, his body starting to shut down despite his vampire nature's protests. Darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision, his enhanced senses fading to normal human levels and then below. He heard machinery approaching, felt debris being moved by equipment stronger than even his enhanced physiology. Voices shouting in languages he didn't recognize. Then arms grabbing him, lifting him, carrying him toward light and air and possibility. His last conscious thought before passing out completely. "I didn't feed, didn't cross the line. 40 years of principles maintained, even when they should have killed me. Whistler would be proud." Blade woke in a Crimson Dawn medical facility 3 days later, his body fully healed through combination of advanced technology and the synthetic blood substitute they'd administered while he was unconscious. Maul was there, his yellow eyes reflecting something that might have been respect. "You survived," the former Sith Lord said, "against impossible odds, with choices that should have killed you. Impressive." "Vader?" "Extracted by Imperial forces 6 hours after the building collapse, severely damaged but alive. Currently undergoing extensive repairs at an undisclosed facility." Maul's expression was unreadable. "You had opportunity to kill him, to drain him while he was helpless. You chose not to. Why?" "Because I'm not a monster. You are a monster. Just a monster who chooses where to point his fangs." Maul stood, preparing to leave. "The Empire is calling the incident terrorist attack. Vader is diminished in reputation. 3rd time you've survived encounters that should have killed you, which suggests his invincibility is propaganda rather than reality. Crimson Dawn is pleased with the outcomes, despite your survival methods being unorthodox." "And Ahsoka?" "Recovering in the next room. She wants to speak with you when you're mobile." Maul paused at the doorway. "You're not what I expected, Blade. I trained you to embrace darkness, to become more efficient predator. Instead, you've become something that doesn't fit Jedi or Sith categories. Something that uses darkness without being consumed. It's interesting." After Maul left, Blade lay in the medical bed, processing everything that had happened. He'd come to this galaxy 6 months ago. A hunter from Earth, dealing with vampire nature through chemistry and discipline. Now he'd trained in the dark side, fought the Empire's ultimate weapon multiple times, and discovered that maintaining humanity in a galaxy this violent required accepting darkness while refusing to let it define him. The hunger was still there, would always be there, fundamental to his nature. But it was controlled now, not through suppression, but through acknowledgement and direction. He was a predator who'd learned to hunt monsters exclusively, a vampire who'd chosen to never feed on humans, despite biology screaming otherwise. A killer who maintained moral frameworks, even when they were tactically inconvenient. He was still Blade, still the Daywalker. And the galaxy, with its Empire and rebels, its Jedi and Sith, its force and its politics, was learning what Earth's supernatural community had learned decades ago. When Blade hunted you, the smart move was surrender. The dumb move was fighting back. And the fatal move was assuming that just because he operated in darkness meant he'd become darkness itself. Ahsoka visited later that day, Her presence announced by force signatures that Blade was beginning to recognize despite his own force blindness. She looked tired but whole, her white lightsabers secured at her belt, her expression mixing relief with complicated emotions. "You didn't feed," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Maul told me. Said you chose to die rather than cross your line. Didn't I, though?" Details. Ahsoka's smile was brief. "You proved something important. That darkness can be acknowledged without being embraced. That power doesn't have to corrupt if you maintain principles worth more than survival. The Jedi couldn't accept that. The Sith wouldn't understand it, but you've demonstrated it's possible." "What happens now?" Blade asked. "Now? We've declared war on the Empire's ultimate weapon and survived. Vader will recover, will hunt us with renewed fury, and eventually we'll face him again." Ahsoka's expression turned serious. "But you've bought time. Demonstrated he's vulnerable. Given hope to people across the galaxy who thought resistance was impossible. That matters more than tactical victories or strategic gains." Maul would disagree. Maul's perspective is limited by his own trauma. He sees the galaxy through lens of revenge and power because that's all the Sith taught him. "But you and I?" Ahsoka stood, moving toward the door. "We're proving there are other ways, other paths between light and dark, between power and corruption, between survival and principles." After she left, Blade stared at Mustafar, visible through the viewport. The planet where Vader had burned and been reborn, where the Sith Lord maintained his fortress, where Blade and Ahsoka had proven that even ultimate weapons could be challenged. The future was uncertain. Vader would recover and continue hunting. The Empire would escalate. The rebellion would eventually need their help. And somewhere in the darkness, greater threats were stirring. Threats that made even Vader look manageable by comparison. But for now, in this moment, Blade had accomplished something that mattered. He'd survived 6 months in a galaxy far more dangerous than Earth, adapted to threats that made vampires look simple, and maintained the core principle that defined him. He hunted monsters. He wasn't one of them. And as long as he could maintain that distinction, no matter how thin the line became, no matter how much darkness he had to touch, he'd remain the Daywalker, the hunter the monsters feared, the predator who chose his prey carefully and never, ever crossed certain lines, even when those lines should have killed him. Especially when those lines should have killed him. Because that's what separated hunters from monsters. Monsters survived at any cost. Hunters survived with purpose. And Blade's purpose was crystal clear, burning through the galaxy like silver through vampire hearts. Hunt the hunters. Protect the innocent. Never become the thing you fight, no matter what galaxy you found yourself in. No matter what ultimate weapon stood in your way, no matter what. The Daywalker had arrived in the Star Wars galaxy and consumed it not through predation, but through demonstration that even in the darkest places, even facing the most overwhelming power, principles could be maintained if you were stubborn enough to bleed for them. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere in his fortress, undergoing repairs that would take months, Darth Vader was learning a lesson the galaxy's monsters rarely survived long enough to understand. There was always a bigger predator. And sometimes, that predator chose mercy, which made them infinitely more dangerous than those who simply killed.